School Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the Yao Mean of Revolution. World War III alert. Trump attacks Nigeria, pretending like he's attacking ISIS. Before we get into that, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. You in the House of Revolution. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform. Y'all, well, a war in Africa is here. Trump is attacking Nigeria because they were scared to attack Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. Let's get into that.
Breaking news this morning, we are learning new details about the deadly strike operation that President Trump says he ordered on Islamic State terrorists in Nigeria. Listen to this.
He just starting shit.
That, as you can see, released from the Department of Defense yesterday evening. The U.S. military reports multiple ISIS terrorists were killed in the attack, which the president first announced on social media. This comes after the president for months has warned that the United States could take military action in the African nation, claiming that ISIS had been targeting Christians in the region. The president writing in part this on social media about it: I have previously warned that these terrorists, that if they did not stop the slaughtering of Christians, there would be hell to pay. And tonight, he goes on to say, the Department of War executed numerous perfect strikes, as only the United States is capable of doing. Now, Nigeria confirmed the two countries coordinated in this effort, in this strike. Their foreign minister joined CNN earlier this morning.
Nigeria's lying. They're trying to save face. I want you to understand this. Why would Nigeria, one of the most powerful militaries in Africa, they got planes, they got advanced planes. Why would they need to coordinate with the United States to kill alleged terrorists in their own damn country? Nigeria trying to save face, seem like a big dog. No, Trump struck whoever he wanted to strike. And now I've been watching Nigerian news, and people is on the news confronting news reporters for telling these type of lies. No, the U.S. didn't ask for no permission or coordinate with Nigeria. They did whatever the fuck they wanted to do.
This morning.
What took place yesterday clearly underscores the fact that Nigeria is not lacking in will and a commitment to the fight against terrorism.
Now, you see, you bring on a black puppet to come on and say, this shows Nigeria is not lacking in will. Nigeria is ready to face these terrorists. Well, what the hell is the U.S. doing striking the terrorists in your country for? Why is the U.S. striking alleged terrorists in Nigeria? The Nigerians just don't understand. They still slaves to the imperialists.
And as Nada Bashir tracking
this is about
this
oil.
One for us. Nada, what is the very latest that you're picking up?
Well, we're still not getting full details just yet from U.S. officials with regards to the details surrounding this strike. What we do know is the U.S. Africa Command has said that multiple Islamic State targets and militants were killed overnight in these deadly strikes. We've heard, as mentioned, from the U.S. president himself addressing this military action in social media, saying and describing this as a powerful and deadly strike against Islamic State terrorists. And this strike took place in the northern Sokoto region of Nigeria, just bordering Niger. Now, at this stage, again, no clear details with regards to the impact. What we do know is that this was carried out in coordination with the Nigerian government. We've heard from a Nigerian presidential spokesperson and advisor saying that both the U.S. and Nigeria are on the same page when it comes to tackling.
What they just said? The strike took place on the border of Niger and Nigeria. They really wanted to attack Niger, Burkina Faso, and Mali. But Trump wanted Nigeria to do it for him. They're scared. They didn't want to. This is a little motivation for Nigeria to do exactly what Trump told him to do and go fight the terrorist revolutionary nations. If they do not, this was gonna keep happening in Nigeria, and then Trump gonna have to seize those oil wells to make sure terrorists don't get them. Y'all see where he's going? Just like he got to seize that oil in Venezuela to make sure the drug cartels not using it. He's gonna have to seize all that oil in Nigeria if they don't go fight the revolutionary nations.
these security concerns. And of course, what we've been hearing from the White House for several weeks now and from the US president himself is the ramping up of concern around the protection of Nigeria's Christian community against extremist attacks. And it's important to note and underscore that, of course, Nigeria does have a deep-rooted history of security troubles when it comes to Islamist extremist groups. But these attacks that we have seen in the past have targeted both Nigeria's Christian and Muslim communities, two of the largest religious communities in the country. So this is certainly a historic concern within the country, but we are now seeing very clearly that first-hand action by the US military in Nigeria, according to officials, in coordination with the Nigerian government.
Nada, thank you so much.
Now,
much more detail to learn here for sure.
If Russia was saying they're going to strike Islamic State terrorists in Nigeria, the Nigerian government would be pissed off and going off, because the French and the Britain and the US be telling them, you're allowing Russia to violate your sovereign airspace. They wouldn't allow Russia to do this. And the Africans in Nigeria are some fucking flunkies and puppets, their leaders. But the US can strike Nigerians and say they're fighting them on behalf of the Christians. They say they just killed some people today. I don't know if those people were ISIS. I just know they killed some black people in Africa and said they was terrorists. You see?
Sure. Appreciate it.
And the president warning, of course, there could be more to come in Nigeria, writing on Truth Social to the, quote, dead terrorists, warning there will be, in his words, many more if the slaughter of Christians continues. Joining me now in the group chat, Sung-Min Kim, CNN political analyst and White House reporter at the Associated Press, Ashley Davis, former George W. Bush White House official, and Eugene Scott, contributing columnist at the Boston Globe and visiting fellow at the Johns Hopkins University Agora Institute. It's nice to see all of you this morning. Sung-Min, when we look at where things stand, the fact that the president really has cast himself as this peacemaker, often talks about the wars that he says that he has ended, and yet we are seeing this approach not just in Nigeria, but in other pockets around the world. How do we square what we hear from the president and what we see on the ground?
Well, how the administration squares it is that this is all part of President Trump's strategy, his foreign policy doctrine of peace through strength, obviously. However, you have, on the one hand, you have, him touting all the conflicts that he has helped resolve abroad, but then you see a lot of offensive military action abroad. And his aides don't see that necessarily as a contradiction. They say that part of keeping broader peace is making sure that these targets abroad know that the U.S. is willing to strike if necessary. But I also think that this is a contradiction that you're going to be hearing on Capitol Hill, particularly as it relates to these strikes and the strikes that we've been seeing elsewhere in the country. You had the Pentagon saying yesterday that they did this in coordination with Nigeria's government. However, you're already starting to hear from Capitol Hill. What about coordination with us? Is this something that lawmakers should have authorized? And I think that tension, that conflict, is also what we're going to be hearing in the next coming weeks.
Yeah, one would anticipate that, especially we'll likely hear a little bit of it today, but certainly once lawmakers return from their recess. It's also interesting, the president this is not the first time he has called out what he says are targeted attacks on Christians. It's important to note the country itself is about split between Christian and Muslim faith, and the data doesn't necessarily support the president's claim that Christians are being disproportionately targeted. Ashley, this has been, though religious persecution has been a really animating subject matter, if you will, for many conservatives. Does it matter to them that the data doesn't line up? Because that is a significant issue.
Well, good morning, Erica. Nice to see you, and hope everyone had a great Christmas. But I think that it's really important that we need to realize that there's two things. One, that we did coordinate with the government of Nigeria, and two, Nigeria is a really complicated country that we've been dealing with. I mean, I'm a national security hawk, go back to George Bush administration. There's been terrorist breeding in that region for a long time. What I just learned this morning was the fact that we coordinated, which makes it less complicated than before. But I'm very happy that the administration is actually striking.
See, what they did, these dirty bastards, and Barack Obama could thank himself for this. They're saying Africa is a terrorist breeding ground. So they got to, if they can strike one of the most powerful nations in Africa. They doing this on purpose. And Nigeria got the most oil in Africa. one of the nations with the most oil in Africa. Nigeria got the largest economy in Africa with the most people in Africa. This is a test. If they can strike Nigeria, which is supposed to be the roughest military, do whatever they want with them. This was their plans for Africa, and to say terrorists have been breeding in Africa forever, which is a lie. The terrorists that came into Africa with the help of the Europeans and with Obama helping overthrow Gaddafi. Gaddafi was standing in the way of ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and Boko Haram. That's a fact. When they whacked Gaddafi, all hell broke loose.
In abroad than rather than them coming and striking us in our country. In regards to the Christian and Muslim controversies, I mean, we don't know what we don't know. It's so complicated. There's a lot of national security complications that are overlaid between the two groups that the ISIS and terrorist groups are hiding behind the Muslim religion. And so I think that we need to be very cautious that this is
white terrorist Christians are white terrorists are hiding behind the Christian religion, including
with the president, that this is a religious attack.
Yeah, caution definitely. I wouldn't say just based on our reporting.
See, this definitely was a religious attack by fanatic white radical Christians, and that's a fact. White radical Christians attacked Nigeria today.
Support the claims that Christians are being disproportionately targeted. To your point, there are a number of disputes internally. It's not just religious, it's communal. It has to do with ethnic tensions, farmer-herder disputes. There's a lot happening in Nigeria specifically. You know, when we look at Eugene, when we look at the way that this is playing out, well, we're also looking at new movement off the coast of Venezuela. What does this tell you about the focus moving forward when it comes to not just where the U.S. is leaning in internationally, but what it could mean in terms of support domestically when there are these questions continually raised about Congress and even notifications?
Well, that is one of the main questions many lawmakers have, including some on the right. There seems to not be some consistency in terms of vision. If there is a foreign policy agenda, which obviously there is, it hasn't been communicated in a way that it's clearly understood and supported with even some of the people in the president's base. I've talked to voters and they're very concerned sometimes that they don't know what the next move is going to be from this president in terms of global conflicts and international affairs, and how inconsistent it seems to be with what he campaigned on. Part of that is because we know that the president's support is actually more ideologically diverse than I think a lot of people outside of his camp realize. And so there's some issues that are of concern and major priorities for one segment, such as perhaps Christian conservatives, and not others, which might be some of the individuals who want to see America pull back from some of these types of interactions. And so I think what will be really interesting moving forward when the new year begins is seeing what is laid out, what type of vision is communicated, and how the president is able to get different sects within his tribe on the same page.
Hardened Nigeria. In a wildest dream, many people never thought this was possibly possible. Many people thought this can never possibly happen. The United States of America of Donald Trump has struck Nigeria, targeting what they call terrorists, Boko Haram. The United States of America said they've been targeting ICE associates that are stationed and living peacefully in Nigeria. Let's get back on track. A while back, a pastor came out explaining how Nigerian Christians were being killed. He made a lot of noise. Many posts were published, especially on TikTok, where the president of the United States of America was tagged. The pastor was asking for help from Donald Trump. He was crying for help, saying, "We are being killed. We are being targeted. Please come and help us."
The Nigerian government came out openly and denied there is no massacre. There is no genocide of Christians in Nigeria, and look at it today. Is there any Muslim here? United Nations, I know you're watching it. American Senate, you are watching what I'm doing. I'm saying here.
He's CIA.
Special advisor to Trump. Now, please tell Trump to save our life in Nigeria.
Guarantee this man work with the CIA. You see, y'all, whatever please Trump come kill our people and take our oil. They killing us here. So he demand for Trump and the Great White Father to come to Nigeria.
Donald Trump shortly after came out and spoke very openly. He says if the Nigerian government doesn't do anything to protect Christians in the country, the United States of America will come gun blazing to destroy ISIS.
Nigerian government continues to allow
but that's what Putin said. Putin said if nobody's not going to stop the Nazis from killing the Russian Christians in Ukraine, it's going to be a big problem. The U.S. laughed and said Ukraine is a democratic country with sovereign rights. No Christians are being killed while thousands of Russian-speaking Christians was dying. And after about 14,000 Russian-speaking Christians died, then Putin stepped on NATO. Trump and the U.S. could give a damn about any Christians. They're killing the Christians all over the world. And that's a fact. I laugh when people. The U.S. government is persecuting Christians. Nobody would believe that. They all over the world, they persecute Christians using the Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and Al-Shabaab head choppers to do it. That's just a fact.
The killing of Christians, the USA will immediately stop all aid and assistance to Nigeria. We're going to do things to Nigeria that Nigeria is not going to be happy about and may very well go into that now disgraced country, guns are blazing, to completely wipe out the Islamic terrorists who are committing these
This dude disgusting. This dude the worst president ever in history. He worse than Obama. He worse than George Bush. He worse than all of them, bro. That's serious fucking business. Because he came after Bush. He came after Biden, Obama, Bush, Clinton. So the finesse they did, the lies they told, he's telling all of them to look at people straight in their face. That's why his people even so shocked. They couldn't believe what this clown is doing. You see, if Obama would be saying what he's saying, he said Obama started unnecessary war, stealing our money. If Biden would have did that, he would say, "Oh, Biden don't know nothing. It's time to save this country. You're wasting our money. No more wars." But then here this clown go. If Nigeria don't protect the Christians, we're gonna kill everybody in Nigeria. Make it make sense.
horrible, horrible atrocities.
What was the result? The result was Nigerians were up in arms, very angry. They were shouting, "How dare you talk about this? How can you come and violate a sovereign country? How can you dare speak like this?" Many people were very upset at Trump. Was he telling a lie? Well, now you know he wasn't telling a lie. The bottom line is many Africans are used to speaking out without acting. That's one of the biggest problems in Africa. Africans make promises. Africans speak about fact and situation or action.
Nigeria made the worst mistake they could ever make. All the U.S., all NATO need is a few people to agree with them in your country, and those are the new leaders of your country. I've seen this play out. All they need is a handful of people. They're going to turn those handful of people into your leaders of your nation. That's what they did in Libya, Syria. That's what they do everywhere they go. That's what they was doing in Vietnam. Any war, they're going to take the handful of people, agree with them, and those are the freedom, democracy loving people who just want the Western values and everybody else in their country. It could be 90 million versus 10,000. The 10,000 is the rightful rulers of their goddamn country. And those Nigerians who begged for Trump in the U.S., they just need to get that shit on camera and get that shit documented. Now they say, hey, those people is begging us to come save their life, and that's what we got to do.
They will take, but they never take those actions. Africans in general will say, cross this line, I will show you. When you cross the line, they do absolutely nothing. I think Donald Trump has sent a very strong message to the world. I am not one of those people. If I say something, I'm going to do it if you challenge me. Now, what's going to happen?
He's definitely going to do it. And that's why the whole world knows he's finna make that mistake with Venezuela. Venezuela, they preparing. It's going to be a war because Trump not bluffing. if you're not tough enough to stand up for yourself, like Iran or North Korea or China or Russia, that's Burkina Faso and Mali. The only reason he ain't attacked them yet because they got advanced weapons that Russia sent them. They can shoot down planes. They ready, like Venezuela ready. Nigeria, not so ready. Because they don't got the super advanced weapons from Russia. They got American and British and French weapons. That shit don't work against them. Americans got kill switches on their planes. To where if you buy an American jet, that jet will never be able to lock onto another American jet or it won't work. They got killed, and that's why the Europeans are pissed off. They bought all these products from America. This new advanced technology, where they got chips in them, the U.S. can switch your weapons. It'll never shoot at anything the Americans don't want it to shoot at. That's a fact.
We're talking about northwest of Nigeria, where it's predominantly dominated by Muslim. Now, who are these people that are being targeted? The United States of America says they're targeting ISIS associated, so terrorists. Now, after this gets us to this point, I think it's very simple. The Nigerian government was asked to do something about the killings of the Christian by Muslim terrorists, extremists. The Nigerian government rejected the fact that Christians were being targeted. But the fact is, many Christians are being killed in the north. Many schools are being raided by Muslim herdsmen, extremists. Many people are being abducted by Muslim extremists. Are there only Christians being targeted? Well, people say no, not only Christians are being targeted. And that is basically the rhetoric of the Nigerian government. Not only Christians are being targeted. Muslims also are.
You study it, those are the fake Muslims, you see. Those are the fake Muslims, you see. It's the peaceful Muslims like the Libyans up under Gaddafi, the Syrians who was up under Assad. You see, the Iranians, those are real Muslims, you see what I'm saying, to where they're not looking to chop off the heads of black people. They're not racist bastards. These were hobbyists up under Saudi Arabia and up under the United Arab Emirates who's doing that shit in Sudan. Those are the ones we got to watch out for, bro. Those are the extremists who want to see us dead.
Are being targeted. Is this true? Or whether it is
those
true or not,
traders.
Should you close your eyes just because it's not only Christians that are being targeted? No, you should do something about it. And many people feel like the Nigerian government should have said openly, no, we are going to do something about this. Even though it's not only Christians that are being targeted, let us do something about it. Some other people felt like that was a great opportunity for Nigeria to say to the United States of America, let's be honest, we are struggling against these herdsmen. We are struggling against these extremist Muslims. We are struggling against these terrorists, Boko Haram, for years. How about you come and help us? Maybe you could help us from a distance. Maybe we don't want you in because we feel or we fear that America is trying to get into the Nigerian goods and oil and everything. How about you help us from a distance? Because remember, when Trump said, I'm going to come gun blazing and destroy, what did Africans say in general? A lot of Africans say, no, Trump is just trying to find excuses. America is trying to find excuses to get into Nigeria and steal Nigeria's goods. Now, does that make sense? Yeah, it could make sense. Based on what? Based on the history. Which history? In Iraq, bro. In many other places, Afghanistan, all this they've taken.
These people will plot to break up Russia and steal Russia natural resources, which they're still trying to do, and they've been trying to do since the days of Hitler. Everybody else got to be ready to fight for this shit, bro. That's why these other countries, like Nigeria, they finished. Any other African nation, that's why them African nations is lining up to be revolutionary nations, and they trying to align with Niger, Burkina Faso, and Mali. South Africa better get along with the program. They better hurry up, because what happened in Nigeria puts all of those nations on notice. Trump not playing. He coming to seize their shit. He say he's defending the Christians or he fighting for national defense. The man talking about seizing Greenland, and there's nothing NATO can do about it. He not joking.
But is that a reason why you should completely close your door? Maybe not. Maybe you can find an alternative way, because you do have a real problem, which is people are being killed, whether they're Christians or not. But what we're seeing mostly are Christians. Now, what can you find as a solution? The solution would be, maybe, Mr. President of America, you are right. Christians are being killed. Let's find a solution together. What solution can we find? How about you bring your boat from outside? You can
nothing to do with Christians being killed. If no Christians being killed, they would kill the Christians. They started killing the Christians. They set this up. They create the problem and they come with the damn solution. This is resource wars. And Trump tonight to put everybody on notice. This is about resources. And he's seizing. Venezuela just so happen to have resources there on the list. He's taking Greenland. He done told that we taking that for our national strategic defense against Russia and China. This is a resource war. Nigeria, you got resources. The Congo, he just act like he stopped their war, but made them sign over all kind of resources. This is a resource war. And the U.S. military, wherever his resources at, they gonna go fight. It's going to be World War III over this shit in our lifetime. And people just got to get ready. And if you don't get ready and side with Russia and China, your ass is going to get picked off one by one. That's just a fact, bro. They don't care about if you down with them. They're bullying Europe. They're seizing Greenland. Greenland was down with the U.S. They got military bases there. Trump and the U.S. don't care. Sign over all of your shit. No more being halfway down.
We can bomb from outside. We can do the infantries inside. How about you support us with airstrike and we can go inside and do the things? That would have showed a positivity signal to the world, saying that the Nigerian government is actually trying to find a solution to this. Because remember, a lot of people are accusing the Nigerian government, saying the reason why they're not doing anything to protect people, especially Christians, is because the majority of people, or at least the people that are very prominent right now in politics in Nigeria, are not necessarily Christians. So they don't necessarily.
Another problem with Nigeria, that's a fake country. That country is not supposed to be that large. They trying to force the North and the South to live as one. They don't want to live as one. They have never lived as one. You just start doing that shit up on the bridge. That's the real problem. And then probably Nigeria probably just gonna have to separate. That's just a fact. They're not gonna be able to be that large country of 200 something million people. That's gonna have to end. That's gonna have to end. They don't want to get along because the imperialists forced them, so you will have this problem. Same thing in India, same thing throughout Asia. They did this shit everywhere they went. Britain and France redrawing lines. Same thing in the Middle East, Iraq, Syria. They did it on purpose. They created the United Arab Emirates. They created Qatar. They created a Kuwait out of nowhere to start shit in these places. And then who has to come be the intermediary? Who has to come say, okay, I will be the one to decide what's good? And the great white father.
Necessarily care if the Christians are being unalive. This is what some people are saying. Now, if people are accusing you of letting Christians being killed because most of you are not Christians, shouldn't you show the world that that's actually not what's happening? Because the reason why Trump felt the need of saying if Nigeria doesn't do anything to protect the Christians is because he has data that shows that the majority of people, or a great number of people in power in Nigeria, are not Christian. Therefore, they don't care what's happening to Christians. Now, is the world happy to see this? Absolutely not. Is this a violation of people's space and airspace? Absolutely. It's a violation of some sovereignty. Now, when somebody violates your sovereignty this way, what's the goal? The goal is very simple. You want to show you that you are, number one, unable to do anything against it. Number two, what I say stands. There's absolutely nothing you can do about it. Because remember, Nigerians went to the streets angrily saying, Nigeria for Nigeria, Donald Trump must F off.
Mr. Donald Trump, let you be aware that Nigeria is not Vietnam. Nigeria is not Afghanistan. Nigeria is not Iraq. Nigeria is not Iran. Nigeria is not Venezuela. If you attempt to encourage and make aggression and send your armed forces to Nigeria to wage war, it's an unscrupulousness. But be aware that our mosquitoes, they are waiting for your soldiers to bite them and infect them with malaria fever to die instantly.
What are they going to do now? Are they going to strike America back? The challenge is open now. Now, many people also accuse Nigeria of being able. How are you so capable of going to Benin and help the Beninese government retain what you call democracy? We gone to Benin to protect democracy after Benin was attacked by insurgents. Nigeria sent troops on the ground, an airplane to go strike insurgents in Benin. Look at the map. Benin is a foreign country. Nigeria was able to strike Benin to uphold the democracy, as they say. But Nigeria is unable to strike these very people.
When revolutionaries just rose up a couple of weeks ago in the country of Benin to side with the other revolutionaries to kick out the imperialists, Nigeria sent troops, bombed people, hunted people down, because France couldn't do it because it would look like white imperialism. But the U.S. and NATO forced Nigeria to go do it, and Nigeria went and did it swiftly. So people asking, how the hell can you do this in another country, but you can't do it in your own?
That the United States of America is just struck. It's a good question. How is Nigeria able to go to Benin and bombard enemies in a foreign country, but they are not able to send the same force and power to go and destroy Boko Haram in the same country? Do you understand why people would feel like the Nigerian government could be accomplice? So if people present a problem to you saying we are being killed, we are being targeted, what do you do as a father? Let's talk about a family. One of your child say, I'm being targeted here by my brother. One of my brothers is really doing me wrong. He's hurting me. What do you say? Do you say you're not the only one to be hurt? Or do you attend to the situation? Now, if the neighbor say that child cries too much, that child is sitting with scars and stuff, something is wrong in this house. If you don't do something about it, I'm going to do something about it. You get angry to the neighbor, right? Why are you getting involved in things that don't concern you? This is my house. Yeah, are you correct? Yes, you're correct. That's your house. But are you handling your house correctly? Why are you giving the neighbors authority and possibility to come and intervene because he's stronger than you, or maybe call the government to come and take your children away from you because they're always crying and you're always absent? And when your child is speaking about how hurt they are, you are shutting them down by saying that you're not the only one that's hungry. You're not the only one that's hurt here. Everybody's hurt. So you can't be talking about us. I want you to let me know how you feel about this. The Nigerian government has not reacted yet. As far as we see things, what's going to happen? What can Nigeria do? What can Nigeria do right now? America has done something very interesting right now. They've sent a very clear message. Number one, to Nigeria. Number two, to South Africa. South Africa is a country that's not going really well with America right now. The USA has accused South Africa of genocide against white people. And so far, because there's no direct death and direct threat, that's perhaps one of the reasons why they have not reacted. But the message is clear. It means our threats are supported with actions. If we threaten you, we can do something. The United States of America has just struck its 30th boat in Venezuela, bombarding these people. They warned Venezuela. They struck Venezuela. Now, my question to you is, what can Nigeria do right now? Will Nigeria bow down and say, okay, we are sorry, we can do something about it? Well, it sounds good, but it sends a message of helplessness, because then America will show everybody else Nigeria as an example. You see what we did in Nigeria? We bombarded them. Now they're begging. Now, if you continue to resist, we can do the same to you. This is a message sent to South Africa as well. This is a message sent to everybody else who will dare stand strong. This is a message being sent to IOS, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. Let me know how you feel about this. Nigeria being able to go and destroy in Benin, upkeep democracy, but unable to do something in Nigeria where the Christians are being terrorized. Now, a foreign force in the United States of America has just struck inside Nigeria. Didn't the Nigerian airspace and air capacity detect America's airplanes or whatever they use to bombard? Didn't the Nigerian radars and Air Force detect America's presence? Question mark. Now,
no,
where does Nigeria get his weapons from? From America? Now, if Nigeria gets his weapons from America, doesn't this show you betrayal? Should Nigeria turn to Russia for protection? Let me know if you feel about this. It was a great pleasure.
It's a fact. If you buy weapons from the Europeans, they're gonna use it. They're gonna use them against you.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, this is what is happening right now in Nigeria. Nigerians woke up on Boxing Day, that is December 26th. This event happened on Christmas night. Nigerians woke up to the news that the US has begun airstrikes targeting ISIS targets in northern Nigeria. And this is a very significant development because after months of a lot of accusations of Christian genocide in Nigeria. After a lot of threats, ever since this whole controversy between Donald Trump's threat and the terrorist activities that are happening in Nigeria. It is no longer rumors, ladies and gentlemen. It is now a reality because these bombs, they are already dropping in Nigeria right now. It has been confirmed by Donald Trump himself. It has been confirmed by the U.S. Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, and even Nigerian government has already confirmed that it was a military corporation targeting these militants, or you can call them these terrorists in northern Nigeria. And the question you will be asking right now is why now? Why is the US choosing this particular time in this moment in West Africa to conduct this type of military actions in the heart of West Africa? Now, let me give you a clue on how to understand everything that the US is currently doing in Africa, not just in Nigeria, all across Africa. This is how I understand why the US does what they do in Africa. And you need to take note of this, because if you can have this in mind whenever you think about whatever they do in Africa, it will give you a clear understanding of the agenda behind it. Now, everything the US has been doing in Africa in the last couple of years, especially since we are heading into the multipolar world, the US does everything they are doing for one main reason, and that reason is to counter China in Africa. And that reason is to counter Russia in Africa. If you understand it through this lens, you will be able to make sense of everything that is happening. Earlier this week, we saw the second AES summit, which had a lot of revelations about what we are going to expect in 2026, especially in West Africa. Ibrahim Traore made some comments in that summit. Actually, in that summit, he was crowned the next leader, like the current president of the AES, Assimi Goïta, handed over to Traore in that summit. And part of his acceptance speech, Traore made one troubling comment that West Africa is going to face a lot of conflict as we head into 2026, that basically war is coming. That is what Traore was inferring in the speech he made while accepting the presidency of the AES from Assimi Goïta. So now, the US is now in Nigeria. They can now strike any target that they want because the warship is stationed just outside, just on the Gulf of Guinea. In that strategic location that this warship is stationed, they can strike Nigeria from there. They can strike Cameroon. They can strike Benin Republic, and they can strike Niger Republic from that Gulf of Guinea. So this is the reality on ground now. This whole thing is about countering the influence of China in Africa. It is about countering Russia in Africa. Now, let us dig deeper into the primary objective of this US military airstrikes in Nigeria right now, because since the agenda is to counter the influence of Russia and China in Africa, the next question we are going to address is this: where in Africa does Russia and China wield so much influence? Militarily, especially military influence, like military procurement. Where does Russia and China hold much power in Africa? Now, to answer this question, you need to understand that China's influence in Africa, it runs very deep. Almost every country in Africa right now have some kind of economic deal with China, some big, some small, through their Belt and Road Initiative. And what about Russia? Russia is mainly focusing on military deals, nuclear power plants, especially in the Alliance of Sahel States. And that answers the question. Russia and China's influence, although they run deep on the continent, but their main base of military influence in the whole of Africa is in the alliance of Sahel states. That is where the African Corps, the Russian-backed paramilitary force that took over from the Wagner group, that is where they are very strong in Africa. So if Donald Trump striking Nigeria is about countering the influence of Russia and China in Africa, where do you think that their primary focus is going to be based on? I'm telling you, it is the alliance of Sahel states. This whole operation is all about countering Russia in the AES, countering the influence of Russia in the alliance of Sahel states. Now, before the revolutionary government took over in the three countries of Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso, it is the U.S. military base, like the U.S. forces were occupying the Air Base 201 in Agadez in Niger Republic. From there, they can strike any part of West Africa. But ever since General Chiani took over back in 2023, that agreement was torn apart. And right now, the U.S. has been kicked out of Niger Republic. So they were basically in desperate need of a secondary alternative where they can strike from. They need a base of operation where they can strike any part of West Africa. So from my understanding, this military cooperation, because it is now official, Nigeria is a military cooperation with the United States. It is not like the US came against the wishes of President Tinubu to strike targets deep in northern Nigeria. Nigerian government signed up for it. And we already know the Nigerian government have already signed up a military cooperation with France, another Western power. So since they have been kicked away, since they have been kicked out of Niger Republic air base, the one they normally use in launching airstrikes across West Africa, the Gulf of Guinea is now their next base of operation. They can basically dock the warship on that coast, on that Gulf of Guinea, and launch any military airstrike anywhere in West Africa. And what we just witnessed on December 26th is a test run of that new base. They have already tested it that they can launch an airstrike from there, and they targeted 2 Nigerian states, Sokoto State. There are also reports that there are some airstrikes in Kwara State. So these are states where JNIM is building momentum in Nigeria. I know you are familiar with JNIM because this JNIM is the particular terrorist group that is currently operating in Mali. They are the ones that are doing everything they can to make sure that Mali does not get their fuel supply. And they are trying and they are failing. They also operate in Burkina Faso. So now, before now, JNIM does not have any footprint in Nigeria. But as the AES were pounding them, bombing them anywhere they are, they started running inside Nigeria. They made their first presence known in Kwara State, and another state in Nigeria that they have their presence is in Sokoto State. And it just happens that these are the 2 states that this airstrike that just happened in Nigeria is targeting. They are not targeting Boko Haram. They did not target the northeast region that is the hotbed of ISWAP or Boko Haram or other bandits that are causing a lot of mayhem in Nigeria. So they are targeting JNIM. That is what they are targeting in Nigeria. There is nothing wrong with that. JNIM is a threat, even if they operate from Nigeria or Burkina Faso or Mali or Niger. They will always be terrorist organizations. So killing them either in Nigeria, in Burkina Faso is a good thing. But here is the thing. They don't want JNIM in Nigeria. They don't want JNIM anywhere in coastal West Africa. And I believe I don't have to say it out loud that based on how the Western media reports the activities of this same JNIM in Burkina Faso, in Mali and Niger, You may agree with me that they can care less if they are in Niger Republic or in the Alliance of Sahel States, but they don't want them in Nigeria. They basically want to push them back to the Alliance of Sahel States. This is what this military operation is all about. And this is only my opinion, because I am viewing this thing from the lens of the fact that the US will do everything to counter Russia and China, especially in West Africa. So if they launch this airstrike against JNIM, the same militant terrorist group that are operating from the Alliance of Sahel States, they are bombing where they are hiding out from Nigeria, in Sokoto State and Kwara State. From what I can understand, they want them pushed back to where they came from. They want them back to Mali. They want them back to Burkina Faso. And they want them back to where they want them to be, causing this fuel blockade in Mali, causing as much damage they can in the Alliance of Sahel States, or to counter the influence of Russia in Africa. So this is how I understand everything that is happening right now. And the whole idea of countering Russia and China in Africa, you may say, well, they are killing terrorists. Well, they are targeting Islamic extremists. And on the surface, it's a good thing, right? But here is the thing. At the end of the day, the only countries that I see as sovereign countries in Africa right now is the Alliance of Sahel States. It is the first time in a very long time that 3 African countries have come together and formed a confederation. And we already saw the progress they are making in pushing back against resource extraction, in pushing back against Western imperialism, in pushing back against neocolonialism, in pushing back against the fact that Africa does not have the right to decide who they can partner with, whether it is Russia or China. Now, Nigeria has opened their house for these Western powers to stamp their feet in West Africa. And you can agree with me that this airstrike is only the beginning. Even Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of War, he made it clear that this is only the first among many airstrikes that will be launched in Nigeria. And who is to say that these airstrikes will be limited to Nigerian airspace? What happens when JNIM start running to Benin Republic, or when they start fleeing to Cameroon, or worst case scenario, fleeing back to the Alliance of Sahel States? Who's to say they will not target them under the pretext of targeting JNIM wherever they are hiding? And we know that they operate from Mali. So the door is now open for what Ibrahim Traore was warning about, that West Africa is heading into a dark winter. That West Africa have some sort of dark cloud hanging on top of every country in the region. And this is all about geopolitics. It's all about geopolitics. It's all about countering the influence that Russia currently have in Africa. So the AES, they have to be vigilant now, because the West, they are moving, and they are moving very quickly. And the base of operation for this whole next phase of their presence in West Africa is Nigeria. They are going to dock at the Gulf of Guinea, and from there, they can hit any target in West Africa. And if the influence of Russia and China militarily, because they are more concerned about the military influence that these two superpowers have in West Africa. So if, let's assume that the coup in Benin Republic succeeded, the coup that was attempted a few weeks ago in Benin Republic, let's assume that it is succeeded, and they find a way to join the Alliance of Sahel States. What does that mean? It changes everything in West Africa. And seeing that they are that close to losing a major coastal West African country to this ongoing revolution that is going on in West Africa. If they have lost Benin Republic to the AES, it means that Russia will now have access, like integrated, because basically they will be integrated into the alliance of Sahel states. And seeing that it nearly happened, these Western powers will make sure that this does not happen. And by docking at the Gulf of Guinea, any attempt by the military in any coastal West African state to stage a coup, it will be met with the highest possible force. Airstrikes. It will no longer be just Nigerian military or Nigerian Air Force striking coup plotters. It will be the US forces collaborating with both France and Nigerian forces to stop any further expansion of the alliance of Sahel states in West Africa. So this is the agenda here. Yes, Nigeria will benefit from this in one way or the other. And the biggest winner in this latest airstrike is the president of Nigeria, President Bola Tinubu, because there is an election coming up a little bit over a year from now. In early 2027, there will be presidential election. And Tinubu can come out and tell Nigerians, you know, I solved security. I made big military cooperation with both France and the US, and we launch airstrikes against jihadists in Nigeria. That's a political win for the president of Nigeria. He can sell himself as a master strategist who has done what a military general, the late President Buhari, could not do. He made deals that led to bombing of terrorists in Nigeria, because terrorism in Nigeria is more than just killing jihadists. It is a high-level political matter. In Nigeria, it is not as simple as bombing terrorists. If the US left everything in the hand of President Tinubu to handle, like these jihadist activities in northern Nigeria, he is powerless to do anything, because Nigeria is a very complicated country. If you bomb them too much as a Nigerian president, northern Nigeria will say, you are killing our people. You are killing our brothers. Yeah, they have said it. If you don't know, let me remind you, Gumi is an advocate of the idea of not killing terrorists in Nigeria. He's advocating for a national budget to cater for their well-being. He is advocating for integrating these jihadists into the Nigerian military. He's advocating for, like, he is their mouthpiece, and this man is working free in Nigeria. He talks to journalists. He can appear in any TV station to push this agenda. And the Nigerian government is powerless to make him stop what he is doing, because Nigeria, as a country, everything dies in the altar of politics. No matter how threatening, no matter how dangerous, whatever game they are playing, as long as it is about winning elections, as long as it is about being politically correct, the Nigerian government does not have the political will to fight these terrorists. So Donald Trump is doing the APC government a huge favor by stepping in, because now they can hide behind Donald Trump and say, you know, we are not the one that bombed the terrorists. It was the US government that came and did it. And they are happy with what is happening, because it is a huge political point for the upcoming election in 2027. For Nigerians, is Nigeria going to gain, and Nigeria is going to benefit from these airstrikes that is happening, because you can believe that this will be an ongoing military operation in Nigeria. I can't say much about if Nigerians are going to benefit from it, but we will have to wait and see the bigger picture for what this means for Nigerians that are living in Nigeria, because everyone, both ECOWAS and the AES, the West African region is now divided down to the middle. And it is what it is. It is what it is. Because right now, everything they are going to be doing, every military strike that will be happening in Nigeria from now to God knows when, It's all about countering what is happening in the alliance of Sahel states. It is all about countering Russia. It is all about countering China. And they don't care if there are civilian casualties. They don't care if civilians are bombed in the process. As long as they don't let Russia and China have a military foothold in West Africa, it is a win for the US. And for the APC government of Tinubu, it is also a win because they just scored a political point that they can campaign with. Earlier in this video, I made it very clear that the target is JNM. That is why this airstrike was striking in Sokoto State and Kwara State, because that is where they are hiding out after being chased out of the alliance of Sahel State. They want to push them back to where they came from. And with that, they will have an excuse to chase them to anywhere they are. And they can possibly say, you know what, we don't need permission from the AES. We will be striking JNM anywhere they are. And it will lead to what Ibrahim Traore warned us about, that West Africa is heading towards a winter of some sort, a war brewing. And they now have their own official confederation military. They launched it just last week. It is now official. The AES is ready to protect their territory. The AES have what it takes to now defend their territorial integrities against any threat, be it the United States, be it Nigeria or France. Yes, this is what it is. It is what it is right now. And we are going to be giving you regular updates on everything that we are seeing on the ground, because what I am saying now is not what you will hear from the mainstream media. The mainstream media will tell you they are striking terrorists, they are killing ISIS-affiliated militant group. That is what you will hear in the mainstream media. But the agenda is simple, and I have made it very, very clear in this episode. The agenda is to counter what is happening in the alliance of Sahel states. And that warship is now docked in the Gulf of Guinea. God help us, they don't misfire into the AES, because we don't want war in West Africa. Tell us what you think. Go to the comment section and tell me what you think about this latest military.
This time ostensibly to protect Christians in the country of Nigeria, to make America safe for democracy, or I don't even know what the justification is this time. This does not have much prospect. In fact, I would go so far as to say it has no prospect for any kind of positive outcome, certainly nothing that's going to have anything to do with protecting Christians in Nigeria or with advancing democracy or American national security objectives, anything positive at all. We're going to get into some of the reasons why I make such a categorical statement, and we have nobody better to discuss this, somebody with a lot of experience in fighting with violent extremist groups. Matthew Ho, who was senior fellow at the Eisenhower Media Group, former State Department official, former combat Marine, and a strong friend of the show. Matt, welcome back.
Hi, Danny. Happy holidays. Belated Merry Christmas.
And an early New Year. We'll just add that in there too.
Right. There we go. There we go.
Grateful to have you on, and especially kind of in this in-between here, the interregnum, I think some call it, of the holidays, but stuff doesn't stop happening, as we saw here with this Christmas. I don't know if you call it Christmas massacre or if you call it Christmas defense. I guess it depends on where you stand as to how you would view this. But let's just take a look at this. First of all, this is the Truth Social that Trump, where he announced what has happened here. I want to read it in its entirety because I think it's really illuminating into where we are. Yeah, if you can toss that one up there. He wrote, Tonight, at my direction as Commander-in-Chief, the United States launched a powerful and deadly strike against ISIS terrorist scum in northwest Nigeria, who have been targeting and viciously killing primarily innocent Christians at levels not seen for many years, even centuries. I have previously warned these terrorists that if they did not stop slaughtering of Christians, there would be hell to pay, and tonight there was. The Department of War executed numerous perfect strikes as only the United States is capable of doing. Under my leadership, our country will not allow radical Islamic terrorists to prosper. May God bless our military, and Merry Christmas to all, including the dead terrorists. That was one of the weirder parts of this, in which there will be many more as the slaughter of Christians continue. President Donald J. Trump, President of the United States of America. What do you make of that? I mean, let's just start with honestly, I want to start with the last part of that, where he says, Merry Christmas to all, including dead terrorists. I mean, on Christmas Eve, or Christmas night, rather, that was kind of weird, even by Trump's standards.
Yeah, I don't think that would be, a message that the Prince of Peace himself would, agree with. Yeah, I mean, just the sadism that this administration continuously displays, whether it comes from the president or his cabinet officials or through their actions, is just ongoing. It's nonstop. That's exactly who these people are. They are sadists and opportunists and con men. There's no genocide of white people of Christians occurring in Nigeria. There's a heck of a lot of killing occurring, but it's not a genocide by any means of the definition. And the opportunism to use this defense of Christians on Christmas Day, the whole thing just reeks and it's abhorrent. And we just go along. I mean, I think everyone else is struck by this too. The fact that we have a president who just writes in that manner and speaks in that manner and capitalizes words like centuries, I mean, just like his whole way about him, it's reproachful, I think, to anyone with a conscience and any degree of concern for their fellow man to witness this administration.
And let's kind of look at some of the claims in there that we're going after ISIS, and that seems to be a big bugaboo. And quite frankly, Obama is kind of the one that really took the lead on this one when he sent U.S. troops back into Iraq in 2015. I think it was in June 2015 when ISIS started moving against Baghdad and against Damascus. Frankly, ironically, then we wanted to send our troops in there. We can discuss why that might have been, but that's when we started talking about how ISIS was this big terrorist threat. And then ever since then, ISIS has always been used for everything. I mean, almost like Bush used the AUMF to justify anything he wanted to do during his 8 years in service. Now then, ISIS is always raised as the bugaboo, whether it was in Afghanistan, whether it was in Syria, Iraq, and now then we've expanded into Nigeria to use that as a statement. So let's take a look at that first of all. Do you see as the ISIS, and there is a genuine ISIS affiliate in Nigeria, that's not fake, but do you see that as a threat to the United States, first of all?
No, they're not a threat to the United States. Most of these groups have their origins in local conflict. They've been dispossessed, they've been preyed upon. They are the inheritors of decades long or centuries long grievances. They're living with the result, say, of colonialism and the drawing of boundaries through tribal, religious, ethnic lands, that the divided resources, et cetera, et cetera. There are so many things to describe these groups and how they've come to be and who joins them that fall far short of this idea that these are maniacal terrorists with only evil in their hearts who are dreaming of 72 virgins in paradise. I mean, it's so far from that caricature. And we know this because there have been people who've studied it and because we have data. And because, if you just apply a little bit of strategic empathy, maybe you understand. But the two things I look at, Danny, in terms of Africa are, one, that in the year before the creation of Africa Command in 2008 by the United States, the number of terrorist attacks throughout Africa numbered into dozens. and now years later, almost 2 decades later, you're looking at thousands upon thousands of terrorist attacks every year, right? I mean, whereas you had in 2008 a handful of groups that you could characterize as terrorists or militias or insurgents or whatnot, you now have literally hundreds of these groups throughout Africa. So the metastasization of this type of organization, of this fighting group, of this jihadism, however you want to describe it, you can trace that to the introduction of Africa Command almost 20 years ago and the insertion of the United States into Africa through commandos, through drones, but most importantly, through the support of pretty awful governments throughout Africa, providing them with all types of support. And then this is borne out. And the second thing I always point to when we talk about Africa is that about 7 years ago, the United Nations did a study of these militia groups, these jihadist groups, again, whatever you want to call them, terrorist groups, whatever you want to call them. And it found that 3/4 of their membership was of people who had come to the organization because either a family member or a loved one had been killed by government or foreign forces, right? So the same things that you and I saw in Afghanistan and Iraq, where people were driven to the insurgency, driven to the resistance because, hey, there are foreigners here and they just killed my best friend. I mean, like that type of phenomena, that's what has been motivating and emboldening and growing these organizations throughout Africa for the last 2 decades.
And that's actually what I wanted to ask you, because there's some may claim, well, the reason why AFRICOM got bigger is because of these terrorist numbers and attacks were growing. And I wonder if you could, as much as you can with whatever the data has shown, talk about, was there a causality, i.e., did the rise in strikes cause the AFRICOM to come in, or was it the other way around? And can you compare that with what you saw in your time in Afghanistan? Because I know you and I used to talk a lot, especially back in the early days of the Afghan war, is that every time there was a rise in attacks, then we would have a commensurate rise in troops, and then another rise in attacks, and then another rise in troops, et cetera, all the way up until we had the surge of 140,000 U.S. and NATO troops, and we know how that worked out. How do you see that dynamic here in Africa?
It's very similar. I think the creation of AFRICOM was not tied to this idea of fighting terrorism. Certainly there was platitudes about that. But certainly, say outside of the Horn of Africa, you really didn't see that type of concern. More it was to have a presence in Africa that the Bush administration believed to be essential due to the disposition of resources, the need for rare earth minerals, metals, essential elements, etc., going forward, as well as for other things that are more mundane, tin, copper, coal, etc. I think that was more in the making of AFRICOM, and why it was such if people recall that time period, this idea of standing up AFRICOM was a big deal. And it was this idea of having this presence. There'd be this commentary about how Africa is they throw out all the different stats. Half of the world's young people live in Africa. Whatever the numbers were to make it seem that it was just a dereliction of duty, a dereliction of responsibility of the world's sole superpower not to have a presence in Africa. And so I think that was more the genesis. And then as you brought in, not so much the foreign forces, but it was more so the support for these governments throughout Africa that were barbarous, cruel, despotic, and providing them with training, with military aid, with area support if need be through the form of airstrikes, later drone strikes. That's where you start to see the government's trying to gain control over these areas, and then through that heavy-handedness, there being this response right? That as the government puts force on these local areas to try and control them, often they were autonomous or semi-autonomous areas where they essentially are left alone. But here's a chance for the central government to show its power and to show the United States that it's in control of its spaces. The local people fight back. And then you have the opportunity to arrive for organizations like Al Qaeda and then later the Islamic State to come in with their brand and also pulling in money, resources, ability to train people, etc., because this was a space that they could fill because these people who were now being pressured, subjugated by the local governments that backed by the world's sole superpower would accept help from anyone. And now more than a generation on, you've had this culture essentially arise where the ideology, the belief system, the worldview of Al Qaeda and Islamic State is something that takes root because it's been there for so long and because they keep getting proven right. When the first Al Qaeda people show up, the conversation is about, the Crusades, and it's about the long history of conflict between the West and the elite, in the East, the need to protect our people, to protect our way of life, et cetera, et cetera. And then the government troops are showing up, and then the checkpoints come in, and then these government troops who are different than the local people start patting down your mom, your sister, your wives as they go through checkpoints. And then the drones start appearing. And then somebody gets killed by a drone, and it just accelerates. And all of a sudden, these crazy people that were talking this thing about the need to band together under some form of flag, and maybe in the case of Al Qaeda, it's this radical Islam, all of a sudden, those guys are starting to make sense. And that's the very same dynamic we saw in Afghanistan and particularly in Pakistan, say in Western Pakistan, where you always had the people who were going to be arguing against the outsiders, arguing that you have to join in their crusade, join their militia, et cetera, et cetera. And then now all of a sudden, like in Pakistan's case, the central government puts 200,000 troops into your tribal areas. And then the checkpoints come. Right. And then again, your mom, your sister, your wife are getting patted down by a soldier from the Punjab, and then the drones start appearing. And so, and then all of a sudden, that guy at the end of the village, he's starting to make some sense now. Right.
That's
and
really
that essentially is how you see the growth of the Pakistani Taliban, from 2003 onwards. And it's very similar dynamic to what's occurring and has occurred in Africa. And again, not that there aren't true believers in these groups, not that there aren't people within Boko Haram or Islamic State of Sahel province or Islamic State of the Lakes region, there in Nigeria. Not that those people don't exist. It's just that the dynamics that have put into motion the reasons for people joining these groups that are, again, on top of decades long, generations long conflicts that have existed. I mean, in the case of Nigeria, one of the fundamental drivers of conflict in Nigeria is between different types of ranchers. Between
I'm actually going to get to that in just a
second. And farmers. I mean, so now you're getting the Cain and Abel stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I guess it's not really funny, but that is painful. I want to get to that in just a second, but I want to get a running start in there first. I want to stick with this issue of ISIS because it seems like that we are not paying any attention at all to this dynamic that you literally just talked about through all the way, whether it was in Afghanistan, Pakistan, or now here in Africa over a long period of time. There's evidence that we literally know nothing here. So Trump had that Truth Social. Following that, you had Secretary of Defense. I'm not going to call him Secretary of War. He came out and with this X post, and he said the president was clear last month the killing of innocent Christians in Nigeria and elsewhere must end. The Department of War is always ready. So ISIS found out tonight on Christmas. More to come. So he's given the implication here that, number one, this is not about the issues you just talked about, which we will touch on more in a second, but it's about ISIS and just about killing Christians, as though for some reason these ISIS guys down there just love to kill people, and especially Christians, and all they got to do is stop, and then we'll stop here. First of all, do you think that that is accurate, an assessment of the nature of the problem, and do they just want to kill Christians?
No. It's not an accurate assessment of the situation. It's far more complicated than that. I have a feeling that You know, the knowledge of this by the administration is incredibly weak. There are probably men and women at AFRICOM pulling their hair out if they haven't already just given up and just, you know, going along with it because that's what I'm supposed to be doing. Just like we knew how many guys, Danny, with Iraq and Afghanistan, particularly Afghanistan, who understood that this is not going to work. This is, you know, and they just they either get out or they get beaten down and go along with it, right? You know, I mean, that's probably the case in Africa Command. You see the reporting in the U.S. is so paltry on this. I don't think any of the major American media outlets has a presence in Western Africa. I didn't see any reporting today from USA Today or Wall Street Journal or the other things I was looking at that gave me any confidence that whoever's writing these articles knows anything about what's occurring there. I would encourage people are interested. Al Jazeera English has been they've been following the situation in West Africa for as long as I've been watching them, and they continually have stories on West Africa. They have a presence in West Africa, you know, and so they've been to the site of where this strike happened. We don't even know how many strikes there were. It seems that there may have only been one missile fired, but we don't know. But Al Jazeera went to that place. I think it's in northwest Nigeria, and it seems that the missile
hit Sokoto State, I think it was called, up in the northwest corner.
And they went to the town, and it seems as if the missile landed in a field behind a school and didn't do anything other than scare a lot of people. And then they spoke to the residents of the town, and the residents of the town say, we haven't seen an armed group here in more than 2 years. So, you know, as long as the commentary I've seen coming out of West Africa from various Nigerian experts on this, who have said this, if you want to strike the Islamic State, why you strike in northwest Nigeria? They're not really there. There are some groups
Gary,
there
if you can put that map
be
up. If you can put the map up here, I want to point this out. You can see in the upper left-hand corner, if you can look real close, you'll see Sokoto. That's where the strike happened, upper left-hand corner. What you're seeing on the screen here is violent actions by various jihadist groups. One is Boko Haram in the green. One is called the Fulani ethnic militia, and then the gray is the Islamic State. First thing you see there is that there's not that much gray as compared to these other ones here. And by the way, most of the gray are rebranded from Boko Haram and some other groups here. But you see almost none of these strikes are in the area where we hit.
Right. And like, as I said, the residents there said they hadn't seen an armed group in more than 2 years. You know, so yeah, I mean, why did they attack there? Do they not have any knowledge of this? It doesn't seem to make any sense. Maybe that they just wanted to do a show, which I think is probably the answer to this, that this was just performance on Christmas Day. Donald Trump, the great protector of the Christian people, playing to his base. So fire off a missile. Yeah, that sounds good. Northwest Nigeria. Most people don't even know where it is on the map. You know, I mean, that type of just do something. And as we seeing the one reporting I've seen from the site says it hit a field behind a school where there have been no armed groups in years. Meanwhile, there is a tremendous amount of violence in Nigeria. It could be throughout the country, as that map just showed. Particularly in the lakes regions, but you know these various groups that have been you know in conflict with the state, with other groups. Oftentimes it's divided along regional or local lines, and the reality is that it's a situation that foreign intervention is not going to solve.
President
It's only
Donald
going to
Trump
make the situation worse.
And Gary, if you can bring up that full screen on the attacks of the rebranded groups, a lot of these some groups that have been fighting. And this has been going on in this particular iteration. You talk about Al Jazeera. This is where I got this from here. This has been going on in this particular iteration since at least 2009. And you see that the armed groups in Africa's most populous country, including at least 2 affiliated with ISIL, an offshoot of the Boko Haram, i.e. they just rebranded for whatever domestic reasons, armed group in the West African province, Northwest, and the lesser-known ISIL affiliate Sahel province, known locally as Lukarawa, whatever. It's local people. You can say it's ISIS or ISIL, depending on how you want to talk about it, et cetera. But it's local issues that are going on. It's what's happening on the ground. It doesn't have anything to do with what was going on in Afghanistan or Pakistan or Syria or any of these other things. We love to talk about it like that, but that's not the case. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what this really is.
Right. I mean, and you see the way the Nigerian government speaks about these groups in the Northwest, this Lakarawa group and others, they refer to them as bandits. And it is more of a situation where you've had this area that has been ruined by war, that has been unstable, where you've had issues, again, whether it's because of borders set by colonial powers, whether it's because of climate change, whether it's because of just actions by corrupt governments at local and national levels, whether it's the lack of resources and the fighting over. I mean, on and on. You have this reality where there is no control by any type of state authorities in these areas. And so you've had these groups that, again, as the Nigerian government calls them, bandits, that have been essentially roving and controlling and, subjugating the local populations. And then, of course, the local populations will stand up groups, and these groups will then eventually get to a point where they are powerful enough to start preying on the local populations. And I think the Lakarawa, if I'm pronouncing that right, from what I've been reading, it came from that type of circumstance where they were stood up to try and gain control, and then that success led them to exert their own control over the area. I mean, it's just a messy, complicated situation that foreign intervention is only going to make worse, because, it's bad enough these people of these areas are being attacked and preyed upon by people from their areas, from their regions, local people. It's worse when it's the government coming from outside to come in and try and maintain the same type of thing, the same desire to subjugate. But then it's really bad when you have foreign powers coming in, because that then, of course, plays right into the hands of those who are using the Islamic State brand for their purposes. And again, I don't want to diminish.
And in fact, Gary, if you can bring up that other one here about the tribal issues, because you mentioned this a minute ago, and this is even more of it. Number one, this has been going on for a long time. For more than a decade, Boko Haram and other armed groups have clashed in the Northeast, forcing millions of people from their homes. Since Tinubu took power over 2 years ago, pledging stronger security, more than 10,000 people have been killed there. In the center, there are increasing attacks on predominantly Christian farming communities by herders of the rival Fulani pastoral ethnic group, which is predominantly Muslim. The attacks there are mostly over access to water and pasture. From several other reporting that I've seen, Matt, it said that there are some that are specifically ethnic killing. I think it's in the hundreds who have been killing people just because they're Christians. And there's unfortunately an equal, in some cases, larger number that are killing people because they're Muslim. But the majority of these kids, and you saw 10,000 just in this one area here alone, is because of local tribal farming and water issues.
Yeah, and from what I understand, the Fulani group is the most violent. That they are the ones that are the largest killers, I guess to say. That they are the most dangerous. You want to try and apply some metric to them, or create some type of hierarchy. And I don't think you'll see conversation about that get to that point in the United States, in the media, from our members of Congress, certainly not from the White House, because now it's taken away from this idea that we're just simply there to fight the Islamic State. I mean, Islamic State, replaced Al Qaeda. Al Qaeda, of course, replaced the communists, right, as the great boogeymen. There's an attempt, I think, to, with Venezuela, for the United States to try and assert narco terrorists, drug dealers as the boogeyman we should all be worried about. But the Islamic State, even more than Al Qaeda, because it's got the word Islam in it, is such a great fear mongering semantic utilized in the U.S. And that's why, as you were saying, Danny, this idea that a lot of these groups have rebranded. A lot of these groups have taken that moniker because they know it gets them the attention. I mean, they're also plugged into a network, and there is some aspect of getting resources or support or money, maybe that way. But we saw that with ISIS-K, the Islamic State Khorasan. The Islamic State is in Afghanistan. The origin story of that is that they were essentially disaffected Pakistani Taliban. There's a good story about how they were brought into Afghanistan by the Afghan intelligence service, the NDS, to try and cause problems within the Afghan Taliban themselves. And then when they weren't having that result, then the NDS dropped them. The Pakistani Taliban that were inside of Afghanistan rebranded it as ISIS-K. And then they got a heck of a lot of attention, including to the point where U.S. warplanes are dropping bombs in support, essentially, of the Afghan Taliban as the Afghan Taliban are fighting ISIS-K in places like Nangarhar and Kunar and things like that, right? I mean, so the madness, I bring all that up just to kind of get people thinking about the madness of all this and where is this going to go? And, is it possible that, this continues in Nigeria, we get involved. I don't think anyone thinks we're going to put troops on the ground there or anything like that, but that we'll be doing some form of airstrike in support of Boko Haram against an offshoot that's labeled as the Islamic State, when neither of them are of any interest to the United States, and certainly neither of them should be supported by the United States. But because one is labeled Islamic State, we deem it's in our interest to attack them, even as we're supporting, again, somebody like Boko Haram or maybe Fulani or any of the other hundreds of groups. And it's important to note that there has been a foreign presence in West Africa, well, for centuries, of course, but in this, say, global war on terror, there has been this presence, and look at what it's got. Look at what has wrought, whether it was the French presence, north of Nigeria, whether it was the intervention, the war in Libya, that a lot of this could be traced to in terms of the instability that the war in Libya brought and what that unleashed throughout Africa, including tons and tons of weapons moving out of Libya into other parts of Africa. But, now you saw in places, say, where the French have been ejected from in the last 4 or 5 years, the Russians have filled that. And in a country like Mali, which is getting support from Russia in fighting their own versions of all these groups, you see that the Mali capital is besieged. That these jihadist groups control the eastern entrances to Mali's capital, and that there's massive fuel shortages and things like that. So you have this throughout Western Africa, and again, I can't make this point enough. The idea of a foreign power coming in and dropping bombs is not going to make it any better. It's actually going to make it
right.
worse.
And that's actually something I want to delve into just a little bit here. This issue that what the president said and what Hegseth said in his ex post, more to come, and if they don't stop killing Christians, then we're going to keep going.
Right.
Do you see any prospects, based on your experience with a number of different violent groups over the last number of years and on different continents even, do you see any prospect that they would say, oh, snap, that's a lot of firepower, I would rather not have those bombs fall on me, so let me not kill any more Christians? Or do you, and what I fear is that they may say, oh, okay, I see how you're going to be playing here, I'm going to now retaliate against more Christians. Do you see that as a risk?
I think for the leaders of this group, they're excited at the notion of the United States coming in. They're not afraid of the United States. They feel that they are part of a lineage that has defeated the United States, whether it was in Afghanistan, whether it forced the United States to flee from the Red Sea. They feel that they are part of regional armies, Islamic armies, armies of the people. However, again, when you want to describe this, that they have that they are the next in line to fight the United States, and so they have an obligation to do this. They have a desire to do this. Certainly, again, when you the attention on them, there's a possibility that they will get more recruits, that people from around the world may come to support them, that there are very wealthy people throughout the Gulf monarchies who may be, setting up payments now to send to these groups in Nigeria because the United States may be coming in. I mean, we've known for a very long time that the greatest source of income for these various jihadist groups comes from the Gulf monarchies, and that hasn't stopped, right? I mean, so if this is the new battleground, if this is where this cosmic battle is, this historical battle, this crusade is going to be fought in Western Africa, then the resources will shift there. And those groups that are in Nigeria or Mali or any of these places are more than happy to accept that. You then have the idea that, saying earlier, that if we know that 3/4 of the membership of these militia groups throughout Africa have come into these organizations because of again, death of a family, death of a loved one, maybe death of a neighbor, by the actions of a government or a foreign government. Well, this is just a recruiting bonanza, that's they're just waiting for. Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Let the United States come in and bomb and kill civilians, and then we will just sit back and wait for the recruits to come in. Make sure we dust out those cases of extra AK-47s and RPGs we have, because once the United States starts killing civilians, we're going to have a lot more people coming in, because again, our actions are proving them right. So those who are right. Yeah.
Yeah. Now I want to look now, but put on your military hat here. You mentioned something a second ago, I think unfortunately is relevant here. And I want you to see or assess what ramifications there could be in this issue that we've just now opened up, this new can of worms. And that is, you talked about the issue against the Houthis in the Red Sea. We stormed in there, and you may recall this big boisterous claim by the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, about how we were going to be relentless and we were never going to stop until the Red Sea was open. And those Houthis, they better just figure it out, or they'll just keep dying until we get it, until the thing is opened up. And then after about a month or so, where we spent over $1 billion, didn't stop anything, and we said, oh snap, again, I see all this weapons that we've been expending here. We've lost a bunch of Predator drones, these multi-million-dollar aircrafts. We can't seem to protect those. Let's just stop and move on and claim victory and move on here.
Right.
Do you see any military attainable objective in Nigeria that we're doing here, or that we can do, that we can say, all right, we will protect the Christians inside of Nigeria by these airstrikes, and by A, B, and C, that will result in a lessening or a safety for the Christians? Do you see an attainable military objective here?
No, I don't think so, because you have such a one, again, the idea of a foreign force doing that is just not likely, and the results of that would be as problematic and as disastrous as any other occupation we've seen in the last decades. I guess the planners at AFRICOM and in the Pentagon would say, well, the idea is to strengthen the central government in Nigeria and give them the tools and resources and support they need to take back this land, take back this territory from these groups, impose some type of order, and then pass on that order and control to local people. The problem being is the Nigerian government is so corrupt. It's so fractured itself in many ways. Its history with the local people is horrible and horrendous. The local people don't want anything to do with the central government. They view the central government just as much as outsiders as they view Americans or French or Russians or whoever. So you have this reality where no amount of force that you're going to put into the area is going to do anything other than create more resistance and then more opportunities for the groups that are best resourced to provide support to that resistance, which in this case are these jihadist groups. So there really is not a military solution here. And the ugly reality, as I see, is you just have to let it go and let it come to a natural pass, not provide support either way, and then over the years. An amelioration will take place where you may have started off with an Islamic State in northwest or northeast Nigeria, but over the years that mitigates itself, or that So this idea that the military force is just going to create more wars, it's going to create more.
And what do you think, Matt? I know you studied a lot about religion, period, just across the board. What do you think about the concept that the United States is saying, okay, even though there has been a nearly equal number of Christians and Muslims killed as a product of this thing going back since 2009. We're just going to say, we want you to stop killing the Christians. I guess if you keep killing the Muslims, that's cool. We don't really care about that. But we want this to stop. How does that play in the country of Nigeria?
Well, the reports I've read coming out is the frustration of Nigerians who are saying, you don't get it. You just don't understand it. It's way more complicated than that. This is not a question of Christians being persecuted. This is a question of entire communities being slaughtered by these groups that don't care whether they're Christian or they're Muslim. I mean, for these Islamic State groups, they oftentimes will view the other Muslims who do not agree with them as worse than being Christians, worse than being Jews, worse than being Buddhists or whatever. That these are the takfirs, right? These are essentially apostates. These are people who are heretical in their own faith. But the scale of the killing is constant throughout the country, and there is not a specific drive to only kill one sect or to kill one group or to, this is ultimately very fair in the scale of the killing, to be, glib. But I think this gives the Trump administration a way out, though, Danny, right? Because if you're saying you're doing this to stop something that's not occurring, right? This white genocide, and nobody is saying this. I keep saying white. And the reason why I keep saying white is because I know that the Trump administration believes that most of its base, when they say Christians, they believe that there are white Christians in Nigeria who are being killed by Black Africans, Black Muslims. And so I'm tripping myself up here, getting into the mindset of the White House on this, because I guarantee that is what they're saying. Is they're saying most of our supporters, those who are most appreciative of what we'll be doing here defending Christians, are believe that they are white Christians.
And I'm sorry, this is not directly related to what you're saying, but it is a painful point to me. I wonder where all the outrage was from the White House when it was the Christian Palestinians who were being killed by the Israelis. Right. Maybe you don't want to care about the Arabs that were killed, the Palestinian Arabs or the Muslims, but there were tens of thousands of Christians, fellow believers, in the inside of the Gaza Strip that no one seemed to care about, either Trump or the White House or even other white Christians. But I digress a little bit. That's just kind of a poignant part. If we care about Christians, it should not matter anything about their skin color or anything else or their ethnicity. It should only matter about the religious, but it doesn't.
Right. And the point being is that if there is no genocide of the Christians occurring, that makes it very easy for the Trump administration to walk away from this, right? And it makes it very easy for them to, as you said earlier, declare victory and go home. See, oh, look, we did. We got involved. We showed them we went in there with guns a-blazing, or whatever Donald Trump said. Yeah. And we showed them who's boss, and they backed off. And now there have been no reports of this genocide against Christians in the last week since we did this. There wasn't reports of the genocide against Christians before that, but that doesn't matter to these people. Right. So they do have an out on this because they are making this about something that doesn't exist. Now the scale and the scope of the killing will continue, and like we've been saying throughout this episode, likely increase if the United States gets involved.
Well, and in the remainder of the time we hear, I want to take from that point and pivot to something that's a bigger. The issue in Nigeria is just starting, and although I would love it if they took that easy out, which would make it weird why you started in the first place, but we'll leave that one for at the moment. But that illustrates a bigger issue here, and I want to talk about that in the remainder of the time we have here, and that is the use of force by this current administration. This is just a screenshot here I put together of a number of different sources here. The Department of Defense itself is doing a 2025 year in review. I didn't put anything up other than the screenshot of that because it just brags about everything that they've done. Doesn't have any kind of baseline of basic views about what's actually happened. It's just cheerleading, etc. But in these other screenshots that I have layered on top of that, you see that first of all, you have a lot of domestic use of force. This is all in the 11 years so far by the Trump administration since they were inaugurated. You see there's been federal troops, that has been sent to cities such as LA, DC, Memphis, Portland, Chicago, and New Orleans. Others are threatened in the coming year, maybe in New York and a handful of others. Then you have troops at the southern border. You have issues of posse comitatus, just violate the law, etc. It seems that we're making the use of military force more and more normal inside of the United States. Again, 1 year into 4. But then internationally, the so-called peace president he brags about himself relentlessly that he solved 8 wars, which of course is farcical because he hasn't solved anything. He's talked to some people, and some conflicts temporarily seated, others haven't even come close. Others reject and repudiate any suggestion that he brought the war to an end or even the conflict. But we'll leave that aside for the moment. What he has done is he has launched strikes in Syria, in Iran, in Iraq, in Yemen. There's some assassination complex in Iraq, Yemen, the Red Sea, the Caribbean Sea, the Pacific Ocean, and now in Nigeria. Those are things that have been used by this administration since they came in. There has been no authorization from Congress for any of this. There's been no congressional declaration of war. There's been no congressional use where it's the Congress that's supposed to set this up. And of course, it's mocked relentlessly that, yeah, well, I know that's what the law says. I know that's what the Constitution says, but we haven't done it in the last 3 or 4 decades. So basically, it's no longer a law. So just move on from there. Now that we still see, though, there's potential use in Venezuela. There's always the risk that this thing could explode in Russia between Ukraine, and we could get sucked into that, or the ever-present possibility and threats and warnings that we may be eventually fighting China over the issue of Taiwan. Trump has threatened Mexico, Greenland, Panama, etc. Then there's probably others I can put on that list. But man, that is a lot of stuff for 11 months of 1 out of 4 years of President Trump's term. What does this tell you about the militarization of the United States?
Oh, it's gotta. If it had its own stock, right, you'd be a buy with high confidence. As you just laid out there, the potential next places, none of them are insignificant. None of them are minor. I mean, all of this would be dramatic, and the consequences of any one of those, what in the sense of what they could do. Venezuela, the idea that it could spread throughout the Caribbean. I mean, it's got spread throughout the Western Hemisphere, South America, Central America through instability, right? I mean, the amount of migrants that would I mean, like just, Russia, China, I mean, those are all self-explanatory, but even like this idea of conflict over Greenland, what it would do in terms of shaking the high degrees of cooperation and particularly in commerce between the US and Europe. I mean, the consequences of this stuff it's massive, and the fact that they are so happily bounding into it, right? That they're so positive about it and that they feel like they are really going to accomplish something here other than just starting wars. But I think that's the metric they're going by, Danny. I don't think that there's any idea for them about actually achieving results other than being able to brag about the wars that they're in.
Well, that was my next question. Are we safer today than we were on January 19th of this year?
No, we're in the same place. I mean, certainly, I think this idea that the Russia-Ukraine war, at least there's been negotiations. I know Zelensky's coming, is going to meet with Trump Sunday, and he says it's 90% there, and the Russians are, at least the Russians haven't pulled out of it. So at least with that, there's some degree of negotiations going on, but we've still seen escalation around the edges of it. That is very concerning. And then any of the other types of conflicts that were listed, whether it's the threats of them, this idea we're going to send troops into Mexico, or that we're militarily going to take back the Panama Canal. I mean, the consequences of all that, my God, what that could bring about in terms of havoc, just on a very, just essentially what that could do to the American economy, say, not even to the poor people who'd be ruined by it, but by the American economy. I mean, so this idea that we're somehow safer is absolutely not the case. We are in the same precarious position where our military is overextended, while despite the this administration says that they want to rebuild or reimagine or recenter or consolidate the American empire into something more manageable and go more into an idea of spheres of influence within a multipolar world, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You can read all that in the Trump national security strategy. And then when you pick your head up from the paper and look around and see what's going on, it doesn't seem like they're going to be following that. I mean, even this idea of giving security guarantees to Ukraine, how does that fall in any way in line with what was in that national security strategy that we read?
Yeah.
I mean, like, so there is, an attempt, I think, for the Trump administration to create some type of method to their madness. And we saw that through the NSS. But the reality is that the people in power, the people in charge are, they're different than the previous administration, but in terms of their worldview, in terms of their willingness to use U.S. military force to achieve what they think is essential or necessary, they're no different. And so, no, we're absolutely not safer. We could have been through a host of things, including through arms control. I mean, it's been how much, 3 months now since the Russians offered to extend New START, and the United States has not done anything about that. I mean,
well, I mean, you can argue we have done something about it, though not helpful. So instead of talking about that, what we have talked about is a Golden Dome air defense system that's going to be allegedly impervious to all the things that the Russians are building. And now then we have this Golden Navy that we talked about the other day that's allegedly going to have all these new, battleships, weirdly called, that it's going to be going on there. Whether any of those come to pass, I can't say. But in line with that national security strategy, you saw this Golden Dome situation with the Golden Navy, this expansion that's going on, all this, et cetera. Does this create, and this is what the claim is, peace through strength? This is what we're going to get because of all these things, that we're going to have peace with China and Russia. Is that going to happen?
No, I mean, it's just, I think many people recall, what Tacitus reported about the Roman Empire. They create a desert and declare it peace. This idea that you're going to make peace through annihilation of your enemies. You're going to make peace by destroying and laying waste so that nothing else can occur. That's the logical conclusion of these ideas of the Golden Dome, the Golden Navy, no arms control, maintaining U.S. forces around the world, right, as well as just the rhetoric. Switching the name from Department of Defense to Department of War, gleefully posting videos every week, every third day, however often it is, of people being murdered on the ocean. I mean, the joy in the killing, again, to get back to it, the sadists that we have in power here, if you have men and women like this, I'm both, I'm glad you brought up the domestic side as well. On both the international and the domestic side, the sadists that are in control, where is that going to lead us to? I mean, you have a government composed of Rubios and Hegseths and Millers and Bondis and Gnomes and Becents. Where do you think that's going to go? And so, this idea that somehow we're going to achieve peace through strength by spending $1 trillion on the Pentagon and the Department of Energy and the State Department every year, and that's somehow going to lead us to a degree of deterrence, and that deterrence will then cause will cause a quieting in hostility that will lead to some form of peace through negotiations. Or
and Matt, I wonder if
it doesn't work that way.
I wonder if you could give us an idea, following that lead there, how is this viewed on the other side? Because the implication is that the calculation by all of this strength should be that other sides go, oh snap, look at all that power, we better just go silent on them and not do anything. Is that what generally happens?
No, the opposite happens. They say we can't trust them. This is making us less safe. There's a violation of our security, and we need to take measures to protect ourselves, as well as to make it so that the United States isn't so strong that they feel they can get away with a first strike, or that they can launch a war and win. I mean, and this is the whole concepts of arms control and various other measures. This idea to have some type of parity not to have one side be so much stronger or one side be able to protect itself from the other side, so that that one side is willing to carry out a first strike. I mean, this goes back decades now in terms of why we are in this place. And if you go back, though, to 2001, when the Bush administration pulls out the anti-ballistic missile treaty, this is what everybody was saying was going to happen. This arms race that we're in now, all these new Russian nuclear weapon systems, or the fact that the Chinese are approaching 1,000 nuclear warheads or whatever the number, and they're going to double that in the next 10 years or whatever those numbers are, that was all predicted back in 2001. Joe Biden, when he was chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee back in 2001, discussing the anti-ballistic missile treaty, says this. He says that, if we pull out of the ABM treaty, it's just not going to affect the Russians, but the Chinese are going to double and triple their nuclear forces. We know this is going to happen. That's what Joe Biden said in 2001. And what happened? They did exactly that. The same thing, too, when Barack Obama agrees to New START, but he makes that deal with Senator John Kyle to modernize American nuclear forces. And originally that was less than $1 trillion. And now I think it's approaching $3 trillion, this modernization effort of American forces. The Russian response is, if you do this, we will have to build new weapons ourselves. And that's essentially what the Russians did. So all these nuclear wonder weapons that Vladimir Putin and Russia have rolled out in the last few years, that all is a consequence of George W. Bush's departure abrogation of the anti-ballistic missile treaty, and Barack Obama's modernization of our nuclear forces. That results in all these Russian weapons, including like this Poseidon Trident, this Poseidon nuclear torpedo with a 50 megaton warhead that will, create a tsunami that will wash, everyone, away east of the Appalachians or whatever it's going to do. You know what I mean? Like, these are serious weapons. These are serious concerns. And so then you get into this escalation, right? You go up the escalation ladder. And as one side does something, the other side does something in return, back and forth. I mean, I saw this on a much more tactical level in Iraq. I was a combat engineer, and so I did a lot of counter improvised explosive device work. And our estimate was that within 30 to 60 days of us bringing out a new technology, a new piece of kit, new equipment, whatever, to defeat Iraqi improvised explosive devices, roadside bombs, essentially, that within 30 to 60 days, the resistance, the Iraqi insurgency had countered that. And so you just get in this competition. And so then we create a counter to their counter. And they would then they would counter our counter to their, right? I mean, like, it was just that's the way it worked. And the same thing that applies to whether you're talking about essentially a 155 shell that's on the side of the road, or to, Trident II missiles on our nuclear subs that now have super fuses on them.
That's it. We talk about that motion, counter motion, counter action, et cetera, and then counter. It's been going on all throughout the Russia-Ukraine war. It's been going on now, as you said, even at the strategic level, even involving us. Listen, in the last few minutes we got here, I want to address one other aspect of this, which I think is more important than many believe, and some don't think it's important at all. But I'd like your view on the moral issue or the legal issue that's involved here, because with these, you mentioned these boat strikes in both the Caribbean and the Pacific seas that we've been doing against alleged narco boats, some of which probably were, many which weren't. But even those that were, there is no law that exists, either an international law or American law, that allows you to just execute someone who's suspected of running drugs. You just can't do that, and yet we do it. There was nothing that legally allowed us to go and attack Iran. I actually left that off the list earlier, I think. We attacked Iran there. There was nothing that legally allowed us to go after these people in Nigeria. There's nothing at all. There is no legality whatsoever to allow us to even contemplate overturning the election and the regime in Venezuela. And yet we're apparently poised to do that very thing here. All around here, Matt, you see the United States going further and further away from any even pretending to follow international law. The rules-based order that we used to pray to defend since the end of World War II, or just the morality of anything other than peace through strength. Do you see that as a bigger issue, or is it just that, hey, that's, you can say whatever you want, but the bottom line, it's always just been who's got the most power? How do you see that?
I think, unfortunately, the reality of international affairs has been that way. Go back to Thucydides, right? The strong do as they wish, the weak suffer as they must. This idea that when you have men and women in power who are guided by their own self-interests, in which we find in countries around the world, not just the United States, but in particular in this country, and in particularly when you have a clique in power like we have, that, for the third time, I'll call them what they are, sadists. You have this real understanding that we can do as we want. As long as we have the power, who is going to stop us? And that occurs, not just internationally, but domestically. Who's going to stop us from carrying out warrantless raids, violating civil liberties, violating the American Constitution? Who's going to stop us from that? The local police step out of the way. And Trump, who has talked about his admiration for Andrew Jackson, when Andrew Jackson was president and the U.S. Supreme Court issued a ruling against him, President Jackson said something along the lines of, "I'm waiting for the Chief Justice to march over here with his army to enforce it." So that's the reality that we're dealing with here, because there are no principles attached to any of their actions.
But is there a consequence to that? Meaning, can we just ignore it at our whim and just talk about morality when it suits us, but then not doing it when it doesn't, and who cares?
Well, there is a great consequence. I think we have morality exists in our society because it's not simply a question of right or wrong, or having empathy for someone else and treating someone as they wish to be treated. There are larger social evolutionary reasons for us to have adopted morality, whether it comes through our religion or just comes through our ethics, because without that form of order, without that form of discipline, you are facing chaos. And when you have a perverseness like you have within our government, again, these sadists in power who believe they are acting morally in their own minds and their own righteousness, well, the consequences of that are going to accumulate in the blowback that it's going to engender. Essentially, at some point, the United States is going to try and punch someone in the nose, and it's going to end up in a fight that it can't get out of, and a fight that proves disastrous. And so you could see how these men and women in power, because they have no respect for any other structure other than what they believe in themselves, and they have no desire to achieve anything other than their self-interest. They believe that their power, as Senator Fulbright said about these types of people, they mistake power for virtue. So when they do something like, say, in Venezuela, when they seize an oil tanker with Chinese oil on it, they believe they are fully right. The Americans who do this believe that they are fully right and that they're righteous. And how could there be consequences for such a thing? And eventually there will be. At some point, the world's strongest power in the world, is going to say enough. China's going to say enough. You cannot steal our oil, and there's going to be some form of consequence. And other nations will then drift towards China to align themselves, because China then is operating, if you don't want to call it morality, you can call it principle, at least. There's some type of structure to their decision making that people can trust, that people can follow. With the Americans, there is no structure. It's an incredibly dangerous country to be around, because we act on our whims, and our whims are fully invested with our righteousness. So it's incredibly difficult and dangerous to be America's ally right now, our friend. I mean, throw out another quote, Kissinger, dangerous to be America's enemy, deadly to be America's, and so, the great concern I have, aside from, just your regular structure of morality, the idea of what's being done here is wrong, it's unconstitutional, it's immoral, it's all that, is that where it puts us in terms among other nations. And we're in this very precarious position that we're in, where we're already overextended. We have no manufacturing or industrial capacity to truly support ourselves, right? I mean, and that whether that's from resources to actually getting something out a factory door, we have irritated, annoyed, upset our allies. And we keep picking fights around the world. Like, as you said, we probably could have added more nations to the potential next list, and the people that we do tend to bend over for are either genocide heirs like Benjamin Netanyahu or corrupt and cruel monarchs like MBS or MBZ. So where does that lead us? And who does that put us among, and what does that leave it? Where are we then in terms of our vulnerabilities to other nations, not just militarily, but politically and economically, and even culturally, which I would argue culturally, that's been the most important line of effort for the American empire over the last 7 or 8 decades. But even I think you'll see a diminishment in the American cultural superiority around the world as people turn their backs on the Americans. And so it's just,
Matt, I've seen, unfortunately, all too. I would love to say it's just a clique. It's just the people who are at the top right now who are doing all these immoral and unethical things. But unfortunately, I see a lot around the country, and not even just individuals, but also on like major media that cheer this on and say, yeah, do it. Who cares if it's legal? But Lindsey Graham has many times said, we've shown a couple of times here, he's like, I mean, yeah, I know what the 1973 War Powers Act says, but we violated 130 times. So who cares if there's 131? Right. Meaning it no longer matters. And then the same thing about the Constitution, about the war-making powers only in the legislature. They say, yeah, well, I mean, we've only actually declared war, like 2 or 3 times in our life? Obviously, that's not really a thing. That's just what they said back then. So just ignore that. So the rule of law is going away. You talked just about literally stealing the oil from another country, stealing the ship. According to Trump, he's going to take that, whatever. Nobody is wanting to trust us. And there's too many in America that cheer that on. And I think that's just going to be part of the degradation. Once you see the people at the top, it's going to be mirrored by those increasingly people just in the country. So I just see this going in a bad direction that it could definitely not have a good ending. And I worry a lot about that.
Yeah, no, and it should worry all of us. I mean, we're already, by any metric, a nation that's in decline, an empire that's in decline. Again, just for the reasons we rattled off, we can rattle off other reasons, or our education system, our own investments, how financialization, has just sucked the life out of this country. I mean, if people don't understand financialization, I think it's the idea that most people can understand it this way. The idea that now when you go into a store, they give you 2 different prices, one for cash, one for credit. Anyone doing work on your house wants a check rather than you paying by card because they lose so much in those fees, right? That's financialization, this idea that we don't do anything, we just take, that we own things. And because of our ownership, because of the rents that we have, we, go back to Adam Smith and see how he felt about rents, but this idea that we are a country that is essentially parasitic. It's vampiric. We extract. We don't create anything. And at some point, that base that we have that is essentially hollow will be tested, and we won't be able to make. We won't be able to meet whatever demand is being presented upon us. I mean, we are essentially a nation that everyone around the world understands as this surviving still upon the ruined remains of World War II. That following World War II, when the entire industrial world was astride, besides us and Australia and Canada, about 10 million people between those 2 countries at that point, but essentially the United States was the only industrialized country left in the world. We dictated everything. We wrote the world's monetary and financial order for our benefit. And now all these years later, we still, we're blaming others for our own problems. Even though we're the ones who set the system up, we're blaming others for our problems. And people understand that. And again, this aspects of trust, this view of the American government as at best hypocritical. But I mean, the only ones around the world who are cheering on a return of the Democrats would be the Europeans. because they feel that the Democrats will bring them back into the circle, that they'll be part of that clique. And they'll be first among the vassals of the American Empire.
And we could go on a whole. Actually, on my show earlier today, I talked about there's plenty of parasites on the leadership of the Europeans as well. So that's not a good place to go for that. But in any case, listen, I don't want to beat a dead horse here, but this is a real big issue about.
Maritime standoff is unfolding in one of the world's most strategic waterways. Iran has seized an oil tanker in the Persian Gulf, accusing it of smuggling millions of liters of fuel. The latest flashpoint in an escalating global battle over energy, sanctions, and sea power. Additional footage of the seized oil tanker by Iran shows an empty control room. Iranian state media says the revolutionary
Venezuela don't got the Navy to do this, but Iran can do it.
Guards intercepted the vessel 2 days ago as it was leaving Iranian territorial waters. According to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the tanker was carrying 4 million liters of smuggled fuel, with 16 non-Iranian crew members on board. All crew members have been detained. Iranian authorities say the fuel originated inside Iran and was being trafficked illegally out of the country. The identity of the ship has not been officially confirmed. However, unverified reports circulating online suggest it may be linked to an American businessman, a claim Tehran has neither confirmed nor denied. Iranian Navy Commander General Abbas Gholamshahi said IRGC forces boarded the tanker during the operation and transferred it under Iranian control. This is not an isolated incident. Iran regularly announces the interception of vessels it accuses of fuel smuggling, particularly in the Strait of Hormuz, a vital choke point for global oil and liquefied natural gas shipments. Wednesday's seizure follows a string of similar actions in recent weeks. Earlier this month, Iranian forces seized a tanker in the Gulf of Oman carrying 18 crew members from India, Sri Lanka, and Bangladesh. In November, the IRGC also confirmed the capture of a Marshall Islands-flagged oil tanker in the Gulf. Fuel smuggling remains lucrative in Iran, where domestic fuel prices are among the lowest in the world, creating strong incentives for illegal exports. The latest interception comes amid rising tensions far beyond the Gulf. Just days earlier, the United States seized an oil tanker off the coast of Venezuela. Washington said the vessel was linked to oil shipments involving both Iran and Venezuela. The U.S. Coast Guard recently confirmed the seizure of the supertanker Bella 1 after a multi-day pursuit in the Atlantic Ocean. Although the ship was not carrying oil at the time, U.S. officials say it was already under sanctions for transporting Iranian and Venezuelan crude. According to Reuters, the first attempt to stop the 300,000-ton vessel failed after it changed course and ignored U.S. orders. The ship was later detained and brought under American control. The Bella 1 seizure marks the third tanker interception this month involving vessels linked to Venezuela. Two others, Skipper and Centuries, were also stopped in international waters over alleged sanctions violations. U.S. officials say pressure on oil export networks of sanctioned countries will continue. Venezuela, Iran, Russia, and China have all condemned Washington's actions. Caracas has labeled the seizures state piracy and a violation of international law. In Tehran, criticism is also mounting. More than 150 Iranian lawmakers have accused the United States of maritime piracy, while warning that expanded U.S. military activity in the Caribbean threatens regional stability and undermines national sovereignty. As oil tankers become pawns in a widening geopolitical struggle, control of the seas and the energy flowing through them is once again at the center of global confrontation.
Well, Iran ain't going for that bullshit. If the U.S. keeps seizing tankers, that's what Iran gonna keep doing.
The situation around Venezuela continues to deteriorate with each passing day. A few hours ago, the Reuters news agency, citing its sources in the White House, said that U.S. President Donald Trump had ordered American warships to ensure that the naval blockade of Venezuela would continue until February 2026. Insiders in Washington claim that the Trump administration still cannot decide on resolving the Venezuelan issue through military force. Instead, the United States wants to strangle Venezuela from an economic point of view, completely depriving Caracas of receiving income from the sale of Venezuelan oil. However, the risk of a U.S. invasion of Venezuela is still high. It is reported that if in the next 60 days the Trump administration fails to overthrow Nicolas Maduro with the help of a naval blockade of Venezuela, the United States will be forced to launch an invasion of this Latin American country. At the same time, it is worth noting that even pro-government American think tanks recognize the fact that if Venezuela can withstand the first blow in the first days of the war with the United States, it will be a real disaster for Washington. The fact is that the United States is not ready for prolonged military operations. Furthermore, almost all experts recognize this. Against this backdrop, there is a high risk that a military campaign in Venezuela could turn into a second Vietnam for the United States. Of course, Donald Trump is very afraid to go down in history as the president under whose rule the United States lost an armed conflict to a Latin American country like Venezuela. In this regard, Trump continues to rely on the economic strangulation of Venezuela by pirate hijackings of oil tankers. At the same time, to justify illegal actions in the Caribbean Sea, Donald Trump continues to claim that the United States is seizing only sanctioned Venezuelan oil, which he says belongs to American oil companies that were allegedly illegally deprived of their assets in this Latin American country. Meanwhile, Russia has officially declared that it will not leave Venezuela alone with the aggressor, who not only wants to appropriate the country's oil illegally, but also to overthrow the legitimate government, led by Nicolas Maduro. Furthermore, permanent representative of Russia to the United Nations, Vasily Nebenzia, called the naval blockade of Venezuela by the United States an act of aggression. According to him, the seizure of oil tankers by U.S. warships could lead to catastrophic consequences in the region. According to this senior Russian diplomat, all U.S. actions off the coast of Venezuela are illegal and aimed only at one goal: to change the legitimate government in the country. Vasily Nebenzia argues that the United States wants to establish puppet authorities in Venezuela, who will unconditionally follow Washington's orders. At the same time, the Russian diplomat noted that such measures could become a template for future U.S. military actions against other states in South America. Furthermore, immediately after that, China also officially confirmed its support for Venezuela in its fight against the aggressor. In particular, China's official representative to the UN, Sun Lei, said that Beijing fully supports Venezuela and its sovereignty, and opposes any aggressive acts and intimidation. Thus, China and Russia once again made it clear that they would not leave Venezuela alone with the United States, and would do everything to preserve the sovereignty of this country. By the way, many experts noticed that it was after China and Russia officially confirmed their support for Venezuela that Caracas began to behave more boldly towards the United States. In particular, Venezuela's permanent representative to the United Nations, Samuel Moncada, did not hide his emotions when commenting on the situation around his country. So, in his speech at the United Nations, he called the United States a thief who wants to steal Venezuelan oil. According to him, the United States wants to seize Venezuela and overthrow the legitimate government because of the interests of such American oil corporations as ConocoPhillips and ExxonMobil. Samuel Moncada claims that precisely these American companies are the pioneers in stealing Venezuelan oil. According to him, Donald Trump wants to turn Venezuela back into a U.S. colony so that American oil companies can once again plunder this country. Simultaneously with this, having received support from Russia and China not only in the diplomatic arena, but also in the military sphere, Venezuela challenged the U.S. Navy in the Caribbean Sea. In particular, Venezuelan warships began escorting oil tankers to keep them from being captured by the United States. At the same time, it is reported that modern Russian warships located in the region have increased support for the Venezuelan Navy. In particular, we are talking about reconnaissance and navigation. According to Bloomberg, thanks to such bold actions by the Venezuelan Navy, dozens of oil tankers with Venezuelan oil on board have been able to leave the country's ports unhindered. Meanwhile, seeing that Venezuela is ready to protect its oil from pirate hijackings, the captains of oil tankers also began to act more boldly towards American warships. For example, the statement by the American media that the U.S. Coast Guard seized the oil tanker Bella 1 was refuted. As it turned out, the captain of this oil tanker resisted the Americans and did not allow the fighters of the Maritime Security Response Team to board the ship. It is reported that this oil tanker not only increased its speed, but also began to maneuver. As a result, the military helicopter was unable to land U.S. fighters. Currently, the U.S. Navy has been chasing this oil tanker for 3 days. At the same time, experts admit that the Americans most likely will no longer be able to detain this huge ship. The fact is that the Americans are well aware that any forceful impact on this oil tanker can cause an environmental catastrophe in the region. Thus, it becomes clear that Trump's plan to organize a naval blockade of Venezuela has already begun to fail. Experts are confident that with each new day, oil tankers and the Venezuelan Navy will continue to resist the United States in the Caribbean Sea. As a result, the United States risks not only being permanently left without access to Venezuelan oil, but also losing face before the world.
barrels of oil on December 10th.
We're going to keep it.
Where's it? Are we going to sell it or put it in the strategic
Maybe
oil
we'll sell
reserve?
it. Maybe we'll keep it.
The U.S. government is waging war on Venezuela. Starting in September of 2025, the U.S. military began to bomb boats surrounding Venezuela, primarily in the Caribbean, but also in the Eastern Pacific Ocean. This then escalated in December when Donald Trump declared a naval blockade of Venezuela, which is an act of war, and the Trump administration seized multiple oil tankers full of Venezuelan crude oil. An official White House account on Twitter published a video of a press conference in which Trump said very clearly that the U.S. government is going to steal this oil and these tankers. Listen here.
Speaking of Venezuela, oil, what are we going to do with the oil that we have?
Going to do with what?
The oil that has been seized. The United States seized 1.9 million barrels of oil on December 10th.
We're going to keep it.
Where's it? Are we going to sell it or put it in the strategic oil reserve?
Maybe we'll sell it. Maybe we'll keep it. Maybe we'll use it in the strategic reserves. We're keeping it. We're keeping the ships also.
So in other words, Trump was openly admitting that the U.S. government is engaged in piracy. The U.S. government is stealing oil and ships from other countries, not only from Venezuela, by the way, because the crude oil in these tankers is Venezuelan. So the U.S. is stealing that from Venezuela. But these ships are not Venezuelan. These ships are from companies from different countries. There's a term for this. It's called piracy. The U.S. government is the worst pirate on earth. This makes individual pirates, who try to attack and intercept ships and rob them. These individual pirates are nothing. They're doing child's play compared to the U.S. government, which is stealing oil tankers worth many millions of dollars, along with millions of dollars of oil belonging to a foreign country. This is why memes have gone viral on social media describing Trump and other top U.S. officials like Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Secretary of War Pete Hegseth as pirates of the Caribbean, because they are literal pirates engaged in piracy in the Caribbean. And I need to emphasize, this is not just a one-time action. Reuters reported that the Trump administration has ordered the military to carry out a quarantine of Venezuelan oil. I'm reading here from Reuters, quote, "The White House has ordered U.S. military forces to focus almost exclusively on enforcing a quarantine of Venezuelan oil for at least the next 2 months," end quote. So that would be throughout January and February 2026. The report added that Trump is trying to force Venezuela's president, Nicolás Maduro, to leave power. So the goal is regime change by preventing the Venezuelan government from exporting its oil because the U.S. is stealing that oil. The U.S. government wants to block off all foreign currency revenue to Venezuela in order to cause an economic crisis, to unleash hyperinflation, to make millions of Venezuelans suffer from poverty and inflation and a lack of access to food and other goods. And then the Trump administration hopes that this blockade will cause so much chaos that it will lead to the collapse of the Venezuelan government and regime change. There is absolutely no legal basis for the U.S. government seizing these oil tankers and stealing Venezuela's oil. The argument being made by the U.S. government is that these ships are violating U.S. sanctions. But these sanctions are illegal according to international law. They are unilateral coercive measures. They do not have the support from the UN Security Council. In fact, leading experts on international law at the United Nations published a statement making it very clear that the United States is violating international law. This was published on the official website of the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. These UN experts wrote that the U.S. blockade against Venezuela is, quote, violating fundamental rules of international law, end quote. They added, quote, there is no right to enforce unilateral sanctions through an armed blockade, end quote. They made it clear that imposing a blockade is a prohibited use of military force according to the UN Charter, and it is recognized as illegal armed aggression and that the victim, Venezuela in this case, has a right to self-defense to respond to this U.S. aggression under international law. The UN experts continued in this statement, noting that the illegal U.S. sanctions violate the human rights of the Venezuelan people, and the UN experts emphasized that the U.S. military's bombing of boats in the Caribbean and the Eastern Pacific is another blatant act of aggression that violates international law. At least 104 people have been assassinated by the U.S. government, and the UN experts emphasized that all of these victims were not posing any immediate threat to the U.S., and therefore the use of lethal force was not justified. So U.S. government officials must be investigated and held to account for their crimes. And finally, the UN experts added that there's no evidence that the so-called Cartel de los Soles, the so-called Sun Cartel, there's no evidence that this group even exists. And yet the US government claims that Venezuelan government officials and President Maduro are part of this imaginary so-called Cartel de los Soles. So in short, this statement by top UN legal experts is as clear as it could possibly be. Everything that the US government is doing against Venezuela is blatantly illegal, and the war that the US is waging is based on lies. The Donald Trump administration is not justified in anything that it is doing to Venezuela. The US cannot tell other countries what to do. The US cannot determine Venezuela's laws. Although Trump treats Venezuela like a US colony, and Trump has even claimed that Venezuela's oil and land and other assets belong to the US government.
Just a blockade. Not going to let anybody going through that shouldn't be going through. You remember they took all of our energy rights. They took all of our oil from not that long ago, and we want it back, but they took it. Getting land, oil rights, whatever we had, they took it away because we had a president that maybe wasn't watching. But they're not going to do that. We want it back. They took our oil rights. We had a lot of oil there. As you know, they threw our companies out, and we want it back.
The prominent Venezuelan economist Francisco Rodriguez made a very good point. He's a professor at the University of Denver, and he wrote on Twitter that seizing a tanker in international waters because of alleged violations of U.S. sanctions is the logical equivalent of stopping a driver in France for violating the California speed limit. Venezuela does not have to abide by unilateral U.S. policies that violate international law. This is completely absurd. To understand just how crazy these U.S. acts of piracy are, think about it this way. Imagine Russia put sanctions on U.S. oil exports. The U.S. is the world's leading producer of oil, and the U.S. exports a lot of its oil to Western Europe. So imagine Russia seized oil tankers that were taking crude oil from the U.S. to Western Europe. Russia seized the oil tankers, and then President Putin announced that Russia is going to be stealing that oil from the U.S. and stealing the oil tankers themselves. The world would be outraged. We would see nonstop coverage in the media denouncing Russia as a criminal rogue regime run by pirates. But this is actually happening, and it's not Russia doing it. It's the United States doing it, engaged in these extreme crimes with no consequences. Venezuela's President Nicolás Maduro sent a letter to other member states of the United Nations asking countries to come together and to take action at the UN to stop this U.S. piracy and this U.S. war of aggression against Venezuela. But the UN is not going to do anything because the U.S. helped to design the UN in a way that gave the U.S. veto power over the most important decisions of the UN. The power of the UN is concentrated in the Security Council, and the U.S. has veto power. So the U.S. prevents the UN from actually taking any action that would uphold peace and stop these kinds of colonial wars of aggression that the U.S. is waging right now, just like the 19th century European colonial powers. The U.S. is absolutely following in their footsteps in the 21st century with no consequences. China and Russia are supporting Venezuela and publicly condemning these U.S. threats. But China and Russia are not going to intervene. They're not going to wage a war with the U.S. on behalf of Venezuela. It's not going to happen. In fact, the U.S. government's illegal seizure of these oil tankers is not only part of this escalating war against Venezuela, but it's also part of the new Cold War against China, because these oil tankers that were seized illegally by the U.S. were heading toward China. China purchases more than 3/4 of Venezuela's oil exports. CNBC interviewed a former U.S. Coast Guard captain who pointed out that by seizing Venezuela's oil, the U.S. is not only targeting the government of President Maduro, but also putting pressure on China as part of this trade war that the Trump administration has been waging against China. This is seen as a strategic card that the U.S. can play against China, because this former U.S. Coast Guard captain pointed out that Venezuela sells its oil to China at a discount. So if China no longer imports this oil from Venezuela, China will have to get that oil somewhere else, which will be more expensive. So China has been publicly condemning these illegal U.S. seizures, and China supports the Venezuelan government. But again, China is not going to intervene, because that would mean getting involved in essentially a war with the United States, or at least a proxy war. And China does not want to get dragged in to these conflicts. You know, the U.S. is starting wars all over the world. This is exactly what happened in Ukraine. And China does not want to repeat this horrible catastrophe that we see in Ukraine. And the U.S. government knows this, which is why Trump keeps escalating this war on Venezuela. Every few weeks, they carry out another act of aggression, another escalation. And Trump is now publicly threatening Maduro and publicly telling the president of Venezuela that he has to step down so the U.S. can put in power a puppet like Maria Corina Machado, the right-wing opposition politician who promised to privatize all of Venezuela's oil and sell it off to U.S. corporations.
Forget about Saudi Arabia. Forget about the Saudis. I mean, we have more oil. I mean, infinite potential. And we're going to open markets. We're going to kick off the government from the oil sector. We are going to privatize all our industry. Venezuela has huge resources: oil, gas, minerals, land, technology. And as you said before, we have a strategic location, hours from the United States. So we're going to do this right. We know what we have to do. And American companies are in, super strategic position to invest. This country, Venezuela, is going to be the brightest opportunity for investment of American companies, of good people that are going to make a lot of money. And this is amazing, super exciting for me. We will open Venezuela for foreign investment. I am talking about a $1.7 trillion opportunity, not only in oil and gas, which is huge, and you know that the opportunities, because we will open all upstream, middle stream, downstream to all companies, but also in mining, in gold, in infrastructure, power. We have our grid right now has a 17 gigawatt opportunity of energy potential that needs to be rehabbed. Certainly for technology and AI and tourism. Venezuela has 2,800 kilometers of pristine Caribbean coastline ready to be developed. So this is going to be huge. We will bring rule of law. We will open markets. We will have security for foreign investment and a transparent, massive privatization program that is waiting for you.
This blatant imperialist war of aggression that's being carried out by the U.S. government has been referred to in the Western media as gunboat diplomacy on steroids. And the U.S. government is not hiding the fact that it is engaged in overt imperialism. This is the goal, is imperialism. And repeatedly in my analyses here, I have quoted a very important document that was published in early December by the Trump White House, which is the 2025 National Security Strategy. This document brings back the Monroe Doctrine from 1823, which is an explicitly colonial doctrine that essentially says that all of Latin America and the entire Western Hemisphere is part of the U.S. empire's imperial sphere of influence, and Washington should control everything that happens in the region. Moreover, the national security strategy updates the Monroe Doctrine with the so-called Trump corollary. This is a reference to the Roosevelt corollary that goes back to Theodore Roosevelt, Teddy Roosevelt, who in 1904 announced that the U.S. empire would intervene in Latin America to support its interests as part of the Big Stick Doctrine. This is what Teddy Roosevelt said in 1904 in his State of the Union address, in which he announced the so-called Roosevelt corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. As imperialists always do, Roosevelt claimed that the U.S. empire did not want to intervene in Latin America, but it was being forced to intervene. And at this time in the early 20th century, the U.S. military was constantly invading countries in Latin America and occupying them and treating them like colonies. This is what Teddy Roosevelt said, quote, "Chronic wrongdoing or an impotence which results in a general loosening of the ties of civilized society may in America, as elsewhere, ultimately require intervention by some civilized nation," end quote. And when he says America, he means Latin America. He doesn't mean the United States. This is a more contemporary term. He's talking about the U.S. having to intervene in Latin America. This is what he said, quote, "In the Western Hemisphere, the adherence of the United States to the Monroe Doctrine may force the United States, however reluctantly, in flagrant cases of such wrongdoing or impotence, to the exercise of an international police power," end quote. So Roosevelt was saying, this is not FDR, this is not Franklin Delano Roosevelt, this is Teddy Roosevelt, the blatant imperialist. He was saying that the U.S. is the international police, and the U.S. has to control Latin America if countries are not civilized, in scare quotes. And as an example of this kind of activity, he mentioned the Platt Amendment in Cuba. Now, what is the Platt Amendment? This is a law that the U.S. empire forced on Cuba after, in 1898, the U.S. colonized Cuba. So Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines had been part of the Spanish Empire. They were colonized by Spain. And then in 1898, the U.S. empire defeated the Spanish Empire in an inter-imperialist war, and the U.S. empire took over the Spanish colonies of Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines. And still today, in 2025, Puerto Rico remains a U.S. colony. But in 1901, the U.S. government forced Cuba to approve the Platt Amendment, so the U.S. military would withdraw its troops. But the Platt Amendment gave the U.S. government the so-called legal right to invade and militarily intervene in Cuba anytime it wanted, anytime it deemed it necessary. The publication Oxford Public International Law noted that, quote, "The Platt Amendment sought to establish the parameters of U.S. control and the limits of Cuban sovereignty, thereby effectively turning Cuba into a U.S. protectorate," end quote. So Teddy Roosevelt cited the Platt Amendment as a model for what the U.S. empire wanted to do in Latin America. This gave the U.S. control over Cuba, preventing Cuba from having an independent foreign policy and giving the so-called legal right to the U.S. to intervene anytime it wanted. And this is what Teddy Roosevelt and now Donald Trump wanted to do for every country in Latin America. And the rhetoric of Teddy Roosevelt was hilarious because imperialists always try to claim that the countries whose sovereignty they're violating are actually benefiting from the imperial hegemon. This is what Teddy Roosevelt said about Latin America, quote, "Our interests and those of our southern neighbors are in reality identical. They have great riches, and if within their borders the reign of law and justice obtains, prosperity is sure to come to them, while they thus obey the primary laws of civilized society. They may rest assured that they will be treated by us in a spirit of cordial and helpful sympathy. We would interfere with them only in the last resort, end quote. This is the exact same logic today being used by the Trump administration. This is explicitly colonial logic saying that what's good for the US is what's also good for Latin America. And it's also very revealing that Teddy Roosevelt emphasized that the countries of Latin America have great riches. And he claimed that supposedly Latin America would get prosperous. Obviously, this has not happened. We're talking 121 years later, and many countries in Latin America are still very poor and underdeveloped because US corporations don't want to actually develop these countries. They want to maximize their profits. And today, this is why Trump says very clearly that Venezuela's oil belongs to the US, and US corporations should profit from exploiting Venezuela's oil. So when the US government proposed the so-called Trump corollary in the 2025 National Security Strategy, this is what they mean. Trump is simply bringing back Teddy Roosevelt's 120-year-old big stick doctrine and imposing it in Latin America today. And the National Security Strategy says very clearly that the goal of the US empire is to control all of the strategic natural resources in Latin America, to turn Latin America into a, quote, attractive market for American commerce and investment, end quote, to strengthen the US economy and US industries, and to create a new supply chain in the Western Hemisphere using Latin America's natural resources that cuts out China, because China dominates the global supply chain today. And the National Security Strategy adds that the US is going to force the countries in Latin America to cut off their ties with China and Russia and Iran and other outside powers. And the US empire is going to force the countries of Latin America to, quote, see us as their partner of first choice, end quote, which is another way of saying the countries of Latin America will have their sovereignty violated by the pirates in Washington, who will force the countries in the region to put US interests above their own national interests. Again, this is just colonialism in the 21st century. But before I conclude here today, I want to briefly look at some of the very important words written by a former US general, Smedley Butler, who was a major general of the US Marine Corps. And in the early 20th century, he was the most prestigious, most renowned US general. But his experience being the leader of this branch of the US military, as they constantly invaded countries in Latin America and treated them like colonies, that experience turned him into an anti-imperialist and an anti-war activist. And he famously delivered speeches in the early 1930s, speaking out against US imperialism, which he later compiled into a book published in 1935 called War is a Racket. Now, this text is not very well known about in the US. They certainly don't teach many school children about this, but I think this is an extremely important text because it shows how what Donald Trump is doing today is not new. In fact, Trump is continuing with centuries of US imperialism and colonialism in Latin America. Smedley Butler, this former US general, openly wrote about this in the 1930s. He talked about his time being the leader of the Marine Corps, and he said, quote, I spent most of my time being a high-class muscle man for big business, for Wall Street, and for the bankers. In short, I was a racketeer, a gangster for capitalism, end quote. And Butler talked about how, as a major general in the Marine Corps, he helped invade and carry out interventions in Mexico and Haiti and Cuba and Central American republics for the benefits of Wall Street, for U.S. oil interests, for National City Bank. He talks about helping to oversee the invasion of Nicaragua and the Dominican Republic, for banking houses on Wall Street, and for U.S. sugar corporations. And he also talked about trying to forcibly open China to U.S. corporations on behalf of the Standard Oil Corporation of the Rockefeller oligarchs. And by the way, on this issue of China, this is also something that the imperialist Teddy Roosevelt discussed in his infamous 1904 State of the Union address, where he proposed the Roosevelt corollary to the Monroe Doctrine, saying that the U.S. empire would intervene in Latin America anytime it thought it was necessary for U.S. corporate interests. Well, in that speech, right after Teddy Roosevelt mentioned the Monroe Doctrine, he threatened Cuba, Venezuela, and Panama, which, again, history rhymes in many ways, because once again, today, Donald Trump is threatening Cuba, Venezuela, and Panama. Trump is threatening to take over and colonize the Panama Canal, which he claims belongs to the U.S. Trump has imposed more and more sanctions and tightened the blockade on Cuba. And Marco Rubio, Trump's national security advisor, has dedicated his entire career to trying to overthrow Cuba's revolutionary government. And of course, the Trump administration is waging war on Venezuela in its second term, just as Trump carried out a coup attempt against Venezuela in his first term when he recognized the little-known right-wing opposition politician Juan Guaido, this U.S. puppet, as the so-called interim president of Venezuela. And of course, that coup attempt failed, so now the Trump administration is carrying out a military war to overthrow the Venezuelan government. So history, once again, is rhyming. It's repeating itself a century later. But not just in terms of U.S. imperialism in Latin America, but also in terms of the trade war against China. Because right after Teddy Roosevelt mentioned the Monroe Doctrine, he also talked about how important it was to, quote, secure the open door in China, end quote. This is a reference to the fact that in the late 19th century and the early 20th century, the U.S. empire and the European colonial powers and the Japanese empire were all waging war in different ways against China to try to forcibly open China to trade, in scare quotes, with these Western companies and Japanese companies, which is a way of saying they wanted to turn China into a captive market for their goods, so foreign corporations could profit from this massive country, China. Once again, we see how history echoes. This is exactly what Trump is doing again today with his trade war. It's trying to forcibly open China's economy to U.S. corporations. And this is why Smedley Butler, this former top U.S. general who became an anti-imperialist, this is how he explained how the U.S. military forcibly opened China to Standard Oil, this massive corporate monopoly that was run by the Rockefeller dynasty, these billionaire oligarchs who were the original robber barons. Today, the contemporary equivalent would be Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg. These are the contemporary robber barons following in the footsteps of the Rockefellers. And Smedley Butler, this top U.S. general, explained how the U.S. military simply acts in the interests of these big capitalist oligarchs like the Rockefellers. That was true in the 1930s when Smedley Butler wrote his book, War is a Racket, and it's still true today in the 2020s. The U.S. military is acting on behalf of U.S. corporations that want to exploit Venezuela's natural resources. And famously, Smedley Butler concluded his remarks comparing the U.S. government to a mafia. He talked about Al Capone, the infamous mafia leader, and Smedley Butler reflected on his experience as a U.S. general, and he said, quote, "I feel that I could have given Al Capone a few hints. The best he could do was operate his racket in 3 districts. I operated on 3 continents," end quote. And once again, this is exactly what Donald Trump is doing today. The reason I wanted to look back at that text from Smedley Butler is I wanted to emphasize that Trump is not unique. He is the true face of the U.S. empire. Some other U.S. presidents, like Obama and Biden, they may talk about the rules-based international order and human rights and democracy and all that propaganda. They never actually believed in it. It was just marketing. It was PR. Trump represents the true face of the U.S. empire in all of its criminality. The crimes that the U.S. empire is carrying out today are exactly the kinds of imperialist crimes that the U.S. has been carrying out for centuries. On that note, I'm going to conclude. I am Ben Norton. I am the editor-in-chief of Geopolitical Economy Report. I want to thank everyone for joining me today. Please like and subscribe.
excited to be with you. As always, I'm even more excited because I have a dear friend of mine, historian and author James Bradley, which I will bring him soon here into the studio. I hope to my community, I hope to those who celebrate Christmas, hope you had a wonderful Christmas and you are sort of enjoying the holidays. But I'm very, very excited about James being here, which was kind enough of him to carve out time for our community. So let me bring in James right in. Hi, James.
Hello, everybody.
Good to see you. Good to see you, James. And thank you so much for carving out time for us here. We greatly appreciate it. To those who do not know who James is, I'm going to provide you a brief bio here, but please make sure to go to the description under the video. I put a full bio about James Bradley there. So James Bradley is an American Pacific historian. He's also the author of many, many books, as a matter of fact, 5 books about American involvement in Hawaii, the Philippines, Guam, Japan, Taiwan, Korea, China, and Vietnam. He is also the #1 New York best-selling author of Flags of Our Fathers. It's another book by Fly Boys and the Imperial Cruise and the China Mirage. Just FYI for my community to know, James has spent over a decade living in Vietnam, researching his latest book, Precious Freedom. And to those who are familiar with the U.S. military history, James is the son of the Iwo Jima hero, John Bradley. So welcome, John, and good to see you, my friend.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
I want to start right off the bat, and this way I'm going to do it for the community this time in reverse. We're going to start with the end, then we'll move on. I'd like to provide us with your outlook for 2026 moving in, which only the year's going to end in only a few more days here.
I'm going to do one of the most shocking statements I've ever done, and this will take about 10 to 15 minutes.
Sure.
And I've got notes. And if the audience would realize that I have a broken back, so if I move funny and I need some lozenges, so I might slip some lozenges in my mouth and take a drink of water. But I have been almost sleepless over the last 3 days of what has happened. And I want to get some information out. And I think 99% of you, this will be new and you'll probably disagree, but save this YouTube and see what it is like in February. And this is happening. So a huge topic, 50% of your transactions is the dollar. Your home, the ring you bought your wife, your car, your food, 50% of your life is the US dollar. I'm going to talk about 50% of your life that is about to dramatically change. I'm not a crash guy. I'm not going to scare anybody, but I'm going to give you the details that 50% of your life is about to change. And I'm, suggesting that you might want to make some adjustments. Behind me is a book about Vietnam. And the prime minister in Vietnam in 1966 said in an interview to the New York Times, with the money you are spending in Vietnam, you are going to ruin your dollar. You're going to disconnect the dollar from gold, and it will be the end of the American empire. Not in a day, but eventually. And you know what? The New York Times readers didn't know what he was talking about. And my experience is 99% of Americans still don't know what he was talking about. But the chickens are coming home to roost for in today's money, the trillions that we blew in Vietnam, and then Iraq and Central America and Afghanistan and, whatever. 50% of your life is about to change. In 1971, when we went off the gold standard, which Pham Van Dong had predicted and Americans didn't expect, Mao Zedong said, oh, this is the end of the American empire. Not the next day, but what are these guys talking about? They understood a truth thermometer in the economy, okay? The truth thermometer is real money. It's called sound money. It's silver and gold. It's been real money for thousands of years, and it's sound money because it makes a noise. And I'd like to talk about this. With money, there's no counterparty risk. In other words, I don't need anyone to perform for this to be worth $80. This is an ounce of silver. It's worth $80. If I give it to you, it's worth $80. If you have a US dollar, 80 US dollars, the US government has to perform. They have to be, if they do something funny, the currency can devalue. You have counterparty risk with any currency. Now, Americans have been lied to about money versus currency for almost 100 years. And the truth thermometer, real money, is signaling that there's a problem in your currency, not in the money. I'm in money, and I just doubled my wealth in the last 12 months. And so I'm a very happy guy. But if you hold any paper currency, your life is about to change. What were Pham Van Dong and Mao talking about? In 1971, exactly why did Richard Nixon go off the gold standard? The reason is because the US said that the dollar was redeemable to gold. If you gave dollars to the government, the US government had to give you gold. So Charles de Gaulle, prime minister, was shipping huge warships packed full of bundles of dollars to New York, and the New York Fed was giving gold. And Treasury Secretary John Connally said, President Nixon, they're going to bleed us dry of gold. You got to close the gold window. Now, folks, ask yourself, why would Charles de Gaulle be the one with the dollars? Why wasn't it Japan or Indonesia or somebody in South America? Do you know why? Because we printed a bunch of useless, not useless, but a bunch of currency in the 60s, and we shipped it to Vietnam. We had 500,000 service people there, and we were bribing an entire government, a Potemkin government. It's all in this book. And it cost what today would be trillions of dollars. And guess what? The banks in Vietnam were French. And all those paper dollars went to Paris. And Charles de Gaulle was swimming in dollars, and he sent them to New York. So Nixon closed the gold window. This is a default on the US dollar that's about to come due in 2026. It's taken this long to get to the really crisis area. But everyone in America is talking about affordability. It's not affordability. It's that your currency is devaluing. The can of beans on the shelf, they didn't put more beans on it, so it got more expensive. They put more dollars into the system with COVID and Iraq and Iran and Vietnam. It started here. And there's more dollars chasing goods. That's called inflation. So what happened after we went off? Kissinger did a bunch of shenanigans. He said, the dollar's not connected to gold. We'll connect it to oil. We'll go to Saudi Arabia and make the petrodollar. And we'll fool Americans that the dollar's worth something because the Saudis will demand dollars. And then everybody needs dollars. Japan needs dollars to buy oil, and it will keep the dollar up. It was a false game. It wasn't based on sound money. And then they created paper markets to fool us about sound money, gold and silver. They created these paper markets. By the way, the CIA documents say this. If you want to see the CIA documents with Kissinger creating paper markets in New York and London that would trade paper, silver, and gold back and forth like this and create the value of gold and silver artificially in paper. Not really. So they suppressed gold and silver and created this artificial petrodollar. At the same time, the reason that my audience doesn't know really what I'm talking about probably is they stripped out information about real money, gold and silver, sound money, out of all the MBA books, out of all the business books. If you got an MBA in 1958, you learned that gold and silver were money and that currency was paper on top of it. It was like a chit at the air at the dry cleaners. Your currency was a chit for the gold. It wasn't money. It was currency with a chit for money, gold and silver. And then they have finagled the education system. So if you get an MBA now, you don't learn what I just said. Also, you can look in the dictionary. The definition of inflation for thousands of years has been money printing. You print too much money. See, I have 1 can of beans. You double the money in the system, and all of a sudden people say, oh, the price went up. The price didn't go up. They devalued your currency. Then in the 1980s, look at the dictionaries. They changed the definition of inflation to price increase. So right now, everybody in the media is saying there's inflation, there's affordability. No. Inflation is not price increase. It's the fact they printed too many dollars and you're not complaining about it. So listeners, viewers, stick with me. I'm going to pretend. Listen to this. I'm James Bradley. I just bought CNBC. You know, what's his name bought CBS. I just bought CNBC, and I'm James Bradley. And you know what? I'm going to tell you the truth. And you better record this before the government comes after me, okay? This is CNBC, and I own it now. Okay, I'm going to tell you the truth. Imagine the affordability is actually inflation. What is the #1 investment category this century since 2000? It is gold and silver. What is the #1 investment in the last year, last 5 years, last 10 years, this century? It's gold and silver. And my CNBC people who I all fired, I shot them out back. They won't tell you that because they keep talking about NVIDIA and stocks and all this paper bullshit that is about to crumble. Physical silver is up. No, gold is up 65% this year, and silver is up 120%. I don't have any money. I don't have any Singapore dollars. I don't have any yuan. I don't have an American dollars. I'm completely in gold and silver in Singapore and Zurich. And I'm mostly in silver, and I just went up 120%. So this is my credentials for talking to you. Stocks priced in real money, stocks priced in silver and gold have lost 70% of their value. You're looking at your house that has gone up. It hasn't gone up in value. It's just they printed a bunch of money, so you need more of those paper dollars to get your house, to sell your house. Let me give you some facts. In the year 2000, the Dow Jones Industrial Average was 10,000. Today, it's about, let's say it's 50,000. That's 5x, right? It went up 5 times. In gold in 2000 was $300. It's $4,500 now. It went up 15 times. I'm not talking investments. I'm saying that your currency is going down. It's losing value. Do you want to say something, Doctor?
No. What you mentioned about the gold, because you were right. Because I read the day before, gold reached about 4,500 now. And only a few years ago, a lot of people were saying, oh, there is no way it's going to cross over 2,000. And here we are. The same applied to silver. So you are spot on, James. And I appreciate you sharing that with them. Please continue.
I bought my gold. I'll tell you in the story. I bought my gold at 1,200. It's 4,500. I got out of the dollars. I sold every dollar asset. And I'm telling people what is about to happen in 2026. This affects everyone. And it's not narrowly investments. We're talking about the ability to purchase things, 50% of your life. The reason for the riots in Brussels, the reason for the discontent, if people were doubling their incomes and doing well, we don't have this social fractures in prosperous times. People can't figure out why kids can't buy homes. There's all this confusion. Mandami, we elected. We'll probably have a socialist president in 2028. when the dollar really crashes. And the problem is in your pocket. It isn't in the markets and the beans and the house and housing. No. It's the value of your dollar. It's what Mao and Fan Bandong talked about. So if you look at a Western with John Wayne and Clint Eastwood in it, when they go to the bar, they don't use a paper dollar. They put some silver down. Jesus was sold for silver. Silver and gold is money. This is ancient history. Now, in 1913, we invented the Federal Reserve to really skin Americans and screw them. And in 1933, FDR stole all the gold. The Constitution says that the US dollar has to be a unit of gold and silver because they knew that otherwise you'd have inflation. It says it in the Constitution, but FDR stole all our gold. And he said, you can't buy gold anymore if you're a US citizen. If you're a Rothschild in Paris, I'll sell you gold. 20 some dollars an ounce or 35, whatever he raised it to. You know, but Americans, this was unconstitutional. They should have shoved FDR out. So 1944, Bretton Woods Agreement said, look, we have most of the gold in the world. What we'll do is we'll connect the dollar to the gold, and then you can trust us. We will redeem your dollars, France, Japan, every country in the world will redeem. So there's kind of a gold standard. Not really, but this Bretton Woods thing connected it, right? But then there was National Security Memo 262, which I write about in 2 of my last books. Undersecretary of State Dean Acheson looked at the world economy, which wasn't going well after World War II. And he said, why did we do so well in World War II? Well, it was because we were creating armaments and sending them all over the world. So what we'll do, and this was a national security thing that was secret, and this is what Eisenhower was talking about when he warned about the military-industrial complex. We created a worldwide set of allies that we could sell military equipment to. And we became a military equipment supplier. And then the Korean War and us juicing the Japanese economy raised the economy artificially. The Vietnam War, the Iraq War, the Afghanistan War, you got to print trillions and trillions of dollars. But this is screwing us. But anyway, they invented the IMF, the World Bank, and this is all CIA documented. And take a look at it, how we got screwed. So they created this military kinesium, however you pronounce it. And so then we had Korean War. Now, everybody knows Eisenhower's warning in 1961 about the military-industrial complex, but they forget that his first speech of his presidency was about a cross of iron. He said, if we continue with buying military equipment and producing it, we will crucify Americans on a cross of military iron. Look at the speech. This was 5-star general. This is not James Bradley talking, but he couldn't admit this secret document. It was top secret until 1975. But this is what Eisenhower was talking about, that the government planned this worldwide military stimulus. So JFK stood up and said to the military industrial complex, no Vietnam. Read about it here. 1 month later, at the Christmas party in the White House, the new president, Lyndon Johnson, who had a lot of stock in Brown and Root, which later became Halliburton, and a lot of stock in Bell Helicopter, which was about to go bankrupt, he had his Cutty Sark whiskey, drank about a bottle a day, and at the Christmas party, 1 month after JFK was killed, it's documented in my book, he said to the Joint Chiefs of Staff, you give me my election, and I'll give you your war. This was all planned, folks. They had to print the money, and they wanted to go to war. You don't become a hero unless there's a war. So we sent boatloads of dollars to Vietnam. And that's why Nixon had to go off, had to shut the window. Since 1971, we've just been printing paper money. And it's a confidence game because people have confidence in it. I know most of my audience just has confidence in the dollar. Okay, but replay this YouTube in 2 months. There's something about to happen, and I'm getting to it. So what's the value of real money? A 1963 dime had silver in it. That was worth 10 cents. What's it worth today? It's worth $4.61. Do you see, if you had real money, it retains value. Your house would not be that much more expensive if you had real money. A quarter, you know what a quarter is? 25 cents. 1963. I'm that old that I remember silver quarters. Whereas a quarter, see, a dollar is only worth $1 today, but a silver quarter is worth $12 today. Do you see? That's why the founders said that money has to be real, it has to be sound money. But FDR and Nixon and, you know, this has been changed, and Americans have been bamboozled by the Fed. So our problems, the income gap, the wars, the home costs, the inflation, the social dislocation, it's happening because of this fake money that's underneath. It's like the ocean. If the ocean went up imperceptibly, like 2 feet, there'd be, you know, danger all over the world. And there's this ocean of gold and silver that is a huge market. Who's the #1 holder of gold in the world, folks? You might say Russia, China, America. It's Indian females. Gold is an ancient market. It's under beds in Turkey, India, and the UAE and Africa and China for thousands of years. The #1 holder of gold is all those Indian women walking around with gold jewelry. So it's like the ocean, and it's all over the world. And America is no longer going to be able to control this with paper. So there's a normalcy bias. I call people in Paris and say, "How you doing?" And they say, "Fine." And then I look on YouTube and there's riots all over the street. New York City, I call a friend in New York, "How you doing?" "Oh, everything's great." Folks, did you know that 5,000 police officers resigned in New York when Mandami got elected? There's huge undercurrent changes, but the media is just, you know, everything's fine. It's happy. Look at NVIDIA, you know, stores are locked up. I lived in Asia. It's completely safe. Mini-skirted girls can walk around Ho Chi Minh. Doctor, you know, knows this. Shanghai, Chongqing, anywhere. These are safe streets, safe cities. Americans have a normalcy bias, and they're looking at all this danger and, well, that's okay. I can handle it. Don't go to the bad part of town and don't stay out late at night. No, 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 no. There's stuff happening that we're not calling out. So we've got a Happy Days media, and they're not reporting that 400 people have been jailed in Britain for free speech. They're not reporting this stuff. Folks, the world has changed. India is a poor country, and then look at Prince Charles. UK is a rich country, right? No, it changed. The Indian economy is larger than the UK. Macron went to France and lectured them about democracy. France has fallen apart. China has safe streets. We're not waking up to the rise of the East that the good doctor has been talking about. So James Bradley's talking economics. Let me tell you my story. In 2016, I had a sense, and I don't know what it was. And I stopped my life, and I got in my car, and I drove all over the United States to economic experts to get in their living room and ask them what was really happening. People like Peter Grandish. Of course, you know who Peter Grandish is, the audience. He's the guy that called the 1987 recession. He's the guy that called the 2007, 2008 recession. He's the guy, Peter Grandish. You can look him on the internet. Yesterday, he's saying the things that I'm saying right now. Peter Schiff. Peter Schiff's all over the internet. Tucker Carlson just interviewed him. I went in Peter Schiff's living room, And he wrote the book on the housing crash that was going to come. He wrote it 2 years before the housing crash. He said it's going to come, and it came. These guys have been right. So I drove all over the country, Mark Faber, and talked to these economic experts. And this is what they told me, bottom line. The Fed is going to print money unending. We're not going to default on the debt in the sense that we can just print money, but the default's going to come in your pocket. The money is going to become increasingly less, but they can continue to print. They're never going to pay off the debt. They're continue to print. They told me this in 2016, and they said, you better get your assets out of the US dollar and into sound money. I flew to Singapore and Zurich, went into vaults. I vaulted my gold and silver in Singapore and Zurich, and it has gone up astronomically. I look like I'm talking about problems. Personally, I'm like every day I'm getting wealthier. I'm very happy, but I'm trying to do this as a public service. What I learned in 2016, Peter Grandish told this to 2,000 of his clients. He said, sell all your bonds, sell all your stocks, and get in gold and silver. He had 2,000 clients. You know how many listened to him? One. I've told my family and friends and whatever, everybody thinks I'm crazy. And I think that 90% of the viewership here might be saying, you know, Bradley, the dollar, this is ridiculous. But folks, let me tell you what's happening right now. I can tell you about Singapore, Zurich. I mean, this June, silver was $30. It's approaching $80.
$80.
China right now. So, folks, I'm experiencing deflation. I call people all over the world and, oh, everything's getting expensive. My rent is going down. Do you see? Because I'm in sound money. When I go to the store, I spend less money. It takes me less money to pay my rent. I'm experiencing deflation because of sound money. If you had a bunch of 1963 quarters, your cost of living would be going down. So this is what you can study on the internet, but people are not listening to this. So the economic thermometer is saying that the paper currencies are going to radically decrease this year within the next 2 to 3 months. I think weeks, but in the next 2 to 3 months. And paper burning. I'm almost finished. Just give me a second here.
Sure.
2008, you know, the economic system said we're crashing the dollar, but Obama papered it over by pumping money. And then, you know, in 2019, I interviewed a financial expert on my podcast, and he said there's going to be a war in 2020. And I said, why? He said, because the Fed has to print a lot of money to keep the system going, the Ponzi scheme. And I said, there's going to be a war in 2020? He said, yeah, probably first quarter 2020. So I waited, and it was the COVID war, and we printed trillions of dollars. Everybody stay home, and then we'll print trillions of dollars. And I asked Americans, aren't you afraid of this, that it'll be extremely inflationary? No, I got a check for 30,000. I got a check for, and then 2 years later, when the inflation came through, geez, the cost of beans went up. No. It was that free money that they print in. Okay, so right now, there's derivatives out, folks. These are paper nonsense bets, okay, in the financial system. They estimate that there's $2.5 quadrillion worth of derivatives. There's not that amount of real money in the world, but the bets are huge. The world is de-dollarizing. Folks, central banks all over the world are buying one thing, and it's not the US dollar. It is gold. So you have counterparty risk with your currency, and you don't. Now, Doctor, could you show that Exeter's pyramid by any chance? That I do?
Didn't come through.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
if you look at the Exeter's pyramid, it's like this. At the bottom is real money, gold. On top is paper. There's stocks and cash and whatever. And there's going to be a rush to gold and silver, and it's happening. Now, at the bottom of the pyramid is silver. Now, right now, silver on the Shanghai Exchange is $80 today. It's 75 in New York. That's impossible. The price of silver, if it varied by 2 cents, it would be shocking. The difference is $5, $6. Why? Because New York has paper and Shanghai has the real thing. The makers of BYD and solar panels and Apple phones, they must have silver. What this discrepancy in price is showing, and it's all over the internet, folks, is that the West is unable to deliver. This is going to be a crash event that is with silver pulling out the background, and then it's going to go to gold and oil and coal, and all the derivative funny money structure is going to, I don't want to use the word collapse, but it's going to go like this. The value of your dollar, 50% of your life, is about to change radically. And I could go on and on. But,
James, is it this one here?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so I just found it in my spam folder.
So
I don't know why it went there. So anyway.
Well, if folks look at the Exeter's pyramid, at the top is different types of paper. And then down at the bottom is sound money. So the people on top within the next few months, is my prediction, next few years for sure. But because of this silver dislocation and the gold dislocation between Shanghai and New York and London, the people up on top in all this paper are going to rush down to the emergency situation, and there's going to be a mania for gold and silver. It has happened for 4,000 years this way. That's why Mao came to power, because silver and because of the inflation. An inflationary event leads to war. Look at the flight to safety, folks. See? Stocks, real estate. At the bottom, there's a flight to safety. It's called gold. With this decrease in the value of the dollar, there's going to be more social location, and our great rulers are going to toss the table over. If you're playing poker and you're losing, you toss the table over to finish the game. Tossing the table over, they're going to go to war. This is why we're seeing Venezuela. This is why we're seeing bombing in Nigeria. This is why we're saying talking to take Greenland from Denmark. This is why Japan is talking naughty about China. This is why France is censoring and they're saying we need $1 trillion to go to war against Russia. This is all financially based. And the Western rulers know what I have just said for the last 10 minutes, and they're going to cover it up. They're not going to take responsibility. They're going to cover it up by war. This criminal woman that you're looking at, I don't even want to say her name, she knows it's going to collapse. The inevitable collapse is the headline, and they're going to go to war to cover it up. I'll shut up, and the rest is up to you, Don.
Well, first of all, I can't thank you enough to really share those insights with the community, because that's the whole reason for why I have this channel here, because I want the community to really learn something that is not out there in the media. Media is not going to disclose all this. So we are so grateful to you, James, for really sharing this insightful information with the community here. So, and for the community, just start to think. Literally start to think about what lies ahead, because nothing happens in a vacuum. And I couldn't agree more with James. James, this leads me now to pave the way to what we're going to be talking about, of course, about Venezuela. But before we do this, I would like to have your assessment about the U.S. national security strategy. I read it. I had a chance to, and it's like, wow, where are we going with this? If you can just briefly share with our community what's your assessment of this 2025 U.S. national security strategy, please?
Can I do that by asking you a question first?
Sure.
I've been in the White House many times. I've eaten in the family quarters. I've been in the Pentagon many times. I've been in the I have friends in the government. I never worked in the government like you.
Mm-hmm.
They're saying that Eldridge Colby, was the main guy behind this. What? These are like children writing this stuff.
Yeah.
I read it twice, and it's like, did they think it's 1992 or 1955? Yeah. It was like, it blew my mind. So I'm asking you, what is the quality of these government people? What is your experience?
Well, they're none. They're none, James. Whomever now is in power, in charge, or whatever, the people have no insights. They have no substance. There is no substantive background in understanding the complexities of what geopolitics, for example, is all about. That's my area, what I will focus on. So when you have a Secretary of State like Marco Rubio, who has no clue about how the world operates, just because he's been pushed by the neocon, he's being pushed by the APEC, which is he's serving the APEC. When you have a senator like Lindsey Graham, which, by the way, Larry Johnson, the former CIA analyst, disclosed that within few months, we're going to be hearing about how the senator, Lindsey Graham's been laundering money from Ukraine. You know, to me, if it were up to me, James, how the punishment for those people, I can't say it here. I can't say it on this. I know. That's what I will do. That's what I will do. On a Sunday afternoon after church, that's what I will do. It's because this is where the lack of quality of representatives. So there's no. So when I read the statement, the national security assessments, you know, it's hollow. Especially when I read page 21, I believe, or 22, talking about China's surplus and money, whatever. How did China achieve that? It was based on a strategy. It was based on critical thinking. So, and this is why, you know, I agree with you as far as, you know, who wrote those particular assessments are like, you know, still thinking in the past. And that's, to me,
what was your feeling that working among these people? What? And then you left. Like, what is going on? How can you see a guy in Hanoi? I had coffee with him, and he said, "James, you have the best universities in the world, right?" And I said, "I got people say that," and he says, and then the Washington brainiacs who run the government, they all come from Harvard and Yale and Princeton, and these are the best schools in the world, right? And yeah. And then he said, how come your foreign policy is a disaster for 50, 60, 70 years? Yeah. So what is your answer to that question?
Well, the individuals who are making decisions about education, first of all, are not qualified to begin with. Second, as a former professor here, which I will never teach again here, I made the decision. The classrooms have become some sort of a setting where you have to worry about the feelings of students. You know, you're going to have to worry about, instead of worrying about how they think, you're going to now start to worry about how they feel. About, well, if you are preparing the next generation of leaders, you know, if you are not arming them with knowledge, how are they going to function? And second, you have the likes of Harvard and Stanford and all that, which are the back door of the US government. Think about the government departments in Harvard. Who's in it? And how they push in the policies of the US. Think about Stanford. Think about Yale and all this. So, and this is reflected through our failed and ill-conceived foreign policy for the last 4 decades, in my opinion. When I was working in DC, I used to push against certain narratives. And of course, I was looked at as like, oh no, Mr. O, that ain't gonna happen. That's not gonna be. And turns out to be the case. I was given heads up, James. since early 90s about where China is going to be in 20 years. And they were like, oh, no, ain't going to happen.
No, I gave speeches all over the country about China because I was almost living there. I was commuting between New York. You know, I'd be in Beijing and then get on a plane and pick up my kids from school in New York, and then, you know, spend time with them and go back to Beijing. And I was like living between the two worlds. I was making speeches about it, and people don't want to hear about it, right? They're aggressively want to attack you as anti-American if you say China's rising and we're not, and we're falling behind. That's just a fact. But the Americans don't want to hear it. Isn't that your experience?
That is true. I've been labeled as anti-Americans, like, you have no idea what I've done for this country. So I usually don't talk about my past work and all that. But for those, to me, it's always about, anytime you hear someone talks like that, this is when you realize they have nothing of substance to say. So what they're going to end up doing is attacking you because they know you are right. And my criticism is out of love for our country. You know, do I want to see America succeed? Of course. You know, do I want to see America like the rest of the world live in peace? Of course. But when I see my country pushing towards creating more conflicts, like what we're going to be talking about Venezuela soon, like what we're doing in Venezuela. Why? Why don't you live and let live? Why these wars? Why these conflicts at the expense of an average American here?
But in 1947-48, they embedded that secret plan, NSA 220, that said we have to be an international military supplier to get the economies going. And then Korea happened. I tell this story in my fourth book, China Mirage. But let me get back to this national security thing. So, I mean, I'm a little humble talking about it with you. You can detail for your audience better than me. But to give you the short and sweet, first of all, it's like incredibly stupid. What it basically says is, okay, China is still the enemy, and we're going to be number one. Don't worry. But China is the enemy. Now, we weren't looking, and China got rich. And China built all those factories. We're not going to take any blame for that. But that just happened. So we can't go to war with China right now. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to have the Monroe Doctrine. And then we'll just regime change anyone in South America who doesn't like it. And then all those ties with China that South America has, see, this is South America. And we're just going to snip them all. All those supply lines that grew up naturally over decades and decades, we're just going to snip them all and say, we got the Monroe Doctrine. This is our enemy. And then we're going to relocate magically, like magic, all these factories and suppliers and all this stuff that took decades and billions of hours of Chinese sweat and labor. And we'll relocate it into our hemisphere from Greenland down to Argentina. And then we'll get that thing cooking. And then once we have this safe hemisphere, all sealed off by American power, then we'll be able to fight China. It might take 10 years, might take 20 years, and there's nothing in here about the American citizen. We don't give a damn about the American citizen. We're going to fight China because we're going to be number one. So that, I mean, who is talking here? What, you know, there's no realization of what naturally is happening in the world. So Trump came out and said, BRICS is dead. I just killed BRICS. BRICS is anti-American. I just killed BRICS. And then what, 2-3 countries applied for BRICS membership the next day? China is building gold vaults worldwide. So Saudi Arabia is no longer selling in dollars. They can sell in yuan. China buys in yuan. The Saudi Arabians can go to a gold vault in Riyadh and exchange the yuan for gold. China has realized what sound money is. They have been dealing in it for 4,000 years. They have gold vaults around the world. So now I can accept yuan and go to a gold vault, and it's as good as gold. Whereas the dollar is burning. But the U.S. military is number one. And we'll put 20,000 people down in the Caribbean on ships. That's a sign of weakness, folks. That's not a sign of strength. Why do we that's our back door. We need to put aircraft carriers down there. And then if people remember Mayor Conch from New York, he always said, how am I doing? How am I doing? So let's ask, how is Trump doing? Tariffs, how are those going? They were a complete flop. Ukraine, he was going to solve it in a day. People are dying. Israel wants to bomb Iran. Netanyahu's going to ask for more bombing. I thought we cleaned out Iran in June. Venezuela, we're going to get that oil. Really? Exxon is going to send people in to walk into an oil well in Venezuela, and you are joking. There's people up in the mountains, in the jungles, who are going to get you. BRICS is dead. We are committing piracy on the high seas. This is an international crime. If China and Russia seize American ships tomorrow, they legally can do it because we created the piracy. Jefferson went to the shores of Tripoli against pirates. We have become pirates. Torture. You saw that CBS cut the torture segment, right? Did you see that?
No, I did not.
Folks, 60 Minutes did a whole thing that was approved by their lawyers, and they documented that we sent these Venezuelans to El Salvador to be tortured. They documented the torture.
Wow.
And 3 hours before it was going to come out, the White House said no. And the new Israeli woman, Barry Weiss, who is head of CBS, cut it. CBS is in turmoil because of this. So we're torturing, but you can't know about it. Denmark, you better give us Greenland. UK has cut intelligence ties because of our piracy. The UK, one of the Five Eyes, said, we will no longer cooperate with American intelligence because you guys are going off the rails. See, the UK didn't support America in Vietnam. And now the UK is backing away from America. That's one of the Five Eyes. That's our closest ally. Things are going bazonkers, and it's signs of weakness in the dollar and in America. So that's enough on the national security thing.
Well, great. This paved the way for us to talk about Vietnam. I'm sorry, about Venezuela. By the way, just before we move on to that topic, I want to share something with you and the community. Since you talked about gold and silver, James, what I have in my hand, that's my Christmas gift. And guess what it was? I got coins, but one of them is right here.
So some smart person.
Indeed, in my tribe. So I got a few of those. So you are spot on with what you mentioned as far as the gold and silver and the tangible assets for that stuff. All right, let's talk about Venezuela. And since you are a historian, you are an author, you wrote about Vietnam, you lived in Vietnam, there are those who are saying, oh, Dr. O, there is no comparison between Vietnam and Venezuela. My argument, James, and please correct me if I'm wrong, my argument is that Venezuela is twice the size of Iraq. Venezuela has the mountains, has the rugged terrain similar to that of Vietnam. Venezuela has armed the population that will defend its sovereignty. Wouldn't that be some sort of a comparative to what took place in Vietnam, except in a different time and a different setting? Will I be wrong?
Folks, Secretary of State Dean Rusk was a genius. Robert McNamara graduated with an MBA from Harvard. When they bombed Vietnam for the first time, Rusk was smoking a cigarette and he said, "We'll give Ho Chi Minh a little sting and then he'll come and negotiate." Okay? So that's 58,000 dead Americans and 350,000 injured Americans. And Vietnam, we've got 20,000 troops down in the Caribbean. What is an aircraft carrier going to do? Bombing? That's not going to change anything. 20,000 troops? Are you joking? We had 500,000 troops in Vietnam, and they were all hidden in their bases. They couldn't move out at night. They were afraid. The Vietnamese controlled the land for 50% of the time. We didn't win one day of the Vietnam War. Take a look at it. Venezuela? Yes. Now, let me go back to the money. Sending aircraft carriers and 20,000 troops, that's very expensive. That's juicy military spending. You see, the Americans got tired of all the IUD stuff in Afghanistan. So they didn't like that anymore on their TV screens. So we went to Ukraine. Oh man, $300 billion to Ukraine. Oh, Americans are getting tired of Ukraine. We can't fight China right now. What we'll do is prepare to fight China, which will cost trillions of dollars of military spending. And then the Caribbean, we might go into Venezuela or not, but even the preparation is like, oh man, look at this Raytheon stock and you know, all the military contract, it's juicy. Preparation for war can be more profitable than war itself. So, folks, Americans, why are you spending your money on aircraft carriers in the Caribbean and the subways in New York are dangerous and 5,000 police resigned and Chicago is a hellhole with bullets flying around? You know, wake up, America. Let's demand quality in America and stop this nonsense of we're going to fight China at 10, 20 years from now. Why? And I know the doctor's channel has told you, you know, a lot about, I mean, I don't have to go on and on. This is an educated audience who knows what we're talking about.
Indeed, indeed. So how do you see, James, how do you see it moving forward with what's going on in Venezuela, in your opinion, in your assessment? What can we expect?
Specifically?
You know, from at least the so-called an invasion. I just don't see that, but there's a lot of, this word is buzzing a lot in Washington, D.C., the upcoming invasion of Venezuela.
Okay. Can I just say something? I'm not trying to sell a book, but the name of the book is called Precious Freedom. Why? Because Ho Chi Minh was a genius. He said a war has to have a moral underpinning. You can get Marines excited and put them out for a few days, but if they don't know what they're fighting for, in other words, if I'm fighting for my mom and dad in the front yard, I'm 20 years old, I am really going to fight. I'm going to fight for my home territory. I'm going to fight for my teachers. I'm going to fight for my priests, you know, at St. John's School. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But I go out to some concept and I don't know why I'm there and the whole world is against me. It deflates. And Ho Chi Minh said, we're not going to beat America in the field. We're going to beat them in their living rooms. And he told his people, there's nothing more precious than freedom. You know what you're fighting for, precious freedom. And they went out and they beat America. So right now, like 70% of Americans don't want this Venezuelan thing. If you put 20,000 Marines into Venezuela and 2,000 of them die, we're going to have like 5 to 6% support of this because there's no moral basis for it. Yeah. So I don't think we're going to be that stupid, but I have been wrong about how stupid Washington has been. If we go into Venezuela, just You know, those body bag makers are going to make a fortune. It's going to be a disaster on the ground. And every South American country and Central American country and African country and the total global South. So I'll end with a quote, Doctor. Everybody knows or should know who Professor John Mearsheimer is. Professor John Mearsheimer said yesterday about this Venezuela and the dollar and Ukraine and Israel, whatever. He said, now this is a quote from a guy who knows these people. He said, President Xi and President Putin are sitting back and watching the West commit suicide. That's Professor John Mearsheimer yesterday.
He's right. He's right, because that's all the Russians and the Chinese needs to do. Just take a step back. So, before I let you go, James, I have to ask your opinion about the recent provocation from Japan regarding China. I'm sure you're aware of what the Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takahashi stated regarding Taiwan and how that's provoked China. What I don't want to go into the details because I did an analysis about all this. What I want to ask your opinion is, what I want to ask your opinion about, James, is given the Japan's imperialistic instinct, military history, and so forth, you know, why, in your opinion, will a country like Japan, given the atrocities it's committed in Nanjing, for example, and some other Asian nations, why will it embark on such provocation, knowing that it stands no chance against the Chinese, militarily speaking?
You know, I've seen you talk about the rape of Nanking and your visit there. I gave the eulogy for Iris Chang, who wrote The Rape of Nanking. And when I went to Nanking, they shut the museum and the director came to the train station and there was a procession of limousines and they shut down the museum for a private visit because of my connection to Iris Chang. So before I cry, I just wanted to get that out, that everybody should read Iris Chang's Rape of Nanking and maybe study how she died also, which is very suspicious. So I went to school in Japan, university in Japan. I hit Japan in 1974. I brought the former president of the United States back to Japan and had to negotiate with the US military, the ambassador, and the prime minister of Japan, the Japanese military. And I was representing George Herbert Walker Bush. So all of a sudden I was in the upper echelons. So, you know, Japan is not an independent country. 2 weeks ago, a legislator in the Diet asked the prime minister, is Japan really a sovereign country? How can we be sovereign when we don't control our airspace? How can we be sovereign when the US military can poison our land and we can't do anything about it? How? And then of course she said, yes, Japan is a sovereign country. When you say Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, and Philippines, these are puppets of America. So why would Japan do that? Because if you want to be a leader or in the Diet and you won't follow the US generals and the US military, you're not going to get up there. Something's going to happen to you. You're not going to get in a leadership position. Japan is not a sovereign country. We have, what, 50,000 troops? Every single Japanese person lives, I think, within 70 kilometers of an American soldier. That's a free country. Folks, I've been to Okinawa. I've hitchhiked all over Japan as a kid. I've been dealing with Japan. I dealt with the top government. I can't tell you what President Bush told me about the upper reaches of the Japanese government. But let me assure you that the upper reaches of the government, they are puppets talking the American line. So that's just the Americans saying, you know, do this, do that against China, keep China off edge. Let's go in Thailand and Cambodia. You know, let's South Korea, you know, we'll put these missiles in. Taiwan, you buy something from us and piss China off. You know, we can't invade China right now, but we're going to shadow box all over the place with our puppets. And that is what's going on. Those are not sovereign countries.
Wow. Well, greatly appreciate you, James, for your insights. Before I let you go and give you the last word, I just want.
Cool, Faith. Follow me.